Every single part of the hospital has been destroyed. The whole infrastructure of the hospital has been destroyed. When I spoke to Marwan yesterday, he told me there were 107 patients still in the hospital, 60 medical staff. God only knows what has happened to them. I think we've seen some of the pictures. Surgeons I know have been executed in the last 48 hours there. Bodies have been discovered in the last 12 to 24 hours who have been handcuffed with their arms behind their back. And so there is no doubt at all that multiple healthcare workers have been executed there in the last few days.
You believe executed by whom, Doctor?
By the Israeli Defense Force.
Why would they seek to execute surgeons and medical professionals?
Well, they've been doing it since October the 7th. Over 450 healthcare workers have been killed. Friends of mine that I have worked with.
Do you think that you witnessed war crimes taking place?
Probably. The ground assumption is that they are Hamas. And then if you go this way, you're bound to kill people that are not.
Now, in a rare interview, one soldier tells us about the reality he says he witnessed.
What kind of stuff would they say?
There are no uninvolved, only unarmed. This is something that I'm going to carry for the rest of my life.
Welcome to the Daily Wrap-Up, a concise show dedicated to bringing you the most relevant independent news as we see it from the last 24 hours.
Tuesday, May 7th, 2024. Thank you for joining me today. Now, I know I said yesterday that I was probably not going to be here for the last time, but I'm not even going to say it today as much as I think it might actually be the last one. We had a couple of hitches I talked about this morning on AM Wake Up in regard to a couple of things that went wrong with some drywall and the timing and many different things. So it's going to be a little bit longer for the new studio. I'm planning on giving you guys a nice look at it probably pretty soon once it's done. This is all possible because of all of you. So thank you for that. But in general today, a follow-up from yesterday, a really important follow-up into what, not just the conversation of the illusion of the ceasefire, something that we have been talking about endlessly since the very first week, even something that now is being discussed by, I think it's Mehdi Hassan in the interview with, I think it's on CNN, and brings up that point that, like breaking news that we find out that they even offered this the first week. And so I was thinking, yeah, all of our audience knew that because they watched The Last American Vagabond. We've been repeatedly saying that from the very first week. It's true. The deal was there. Netanyahu lied about it. Their government ignored it. They told the world that Hamas didn't want that, or they denied it, even though that was on the table from the very beginning. So we're going to discuss the deeper parts of the illusion around the ceasefire itself and how they're using this, as I called it, the ceasefire long con, in order to accomplish their goals and make the world think that it's the other side that's responsible. This is a classic tactic, and it's been used by Israel and the United States endlessly throughout their foreign policy in the Middle East. We've talked about the same exact dynamic with Yemen and the Ansarullah movement in Saudi Arabia, how they would pretend there was a ceasefire. Then Saudi Arabia would verifiably break this according to everybody other than the U.S. person involved. The U.S., like Pompeo, would stand up and say it was the other side's fault, and it would all go back. And the point was, in the meantime, Saudi Arabia would take advantage, and they would take in and take more territory. It happened over and over. Anybody honest could see what was happening, and it's the same dynamic, happening right now. And same with the U.S. government. It's not new to see. And the real crux of the point, they're just dishonest. These are dishonest people that do not have any reverence for all the things that Americans care, or any honest human being cares about: integrity, honesty, even just the concept of international law. It's shocking to see how clear this is today. We're also going to talk about the humanitarian aid a little bit, because all these kind of come together, the deal around the hostages, but in particular, what's going on in Rafah. And we've been talking about the fear about what would be going on here. And honestly, I don't even think it's happening in earnest yet. But the actual invasion, the ongoing bombing of Rafah that we've been showing you, as many honest people have, that have been going on for a month now. Bombing into the area that they've said safe. Yeah, not a new story. Happened in Khan Yunis, happened everywhere they've said was safe so far. But the fact that they've been bombing into the area while the international entities and the United States and everybody else acts like they're waiting for some plan while ignoring that they're bombing innocent people with nowhere to go. Now, there's some interesting points around this that we're going to highlight today. I mean, it's interesting to me that we've seen endless amounts of children and women and men included, but specifically women and children that we've seen bombed and attacked and starved over and over and over, buried in rubble. And the argument is, well, they're Hamas human shields without any evidence to back that up. But I've never argued that's impossible. In fact, I find it likely that that would happen at some point. Nonetheless, isn't it also interesting to stand back and go, okay, with all of the amount of innocent people, again, let's just say children or women that we've seen killed, that they go, Hamas is using them as shields, and that's why we just had to, our hands were tied. Okay, well then how have we not seen a single example of a Hamas member that you took down alongside them? Doesn't that seem like a pretty powerful point to think about? Now, you could argue that they just don't have it. They blew them up, or they didn't decide to show any number of things you could assume into, giving them the benefit of the doubt, which I have no idea why you would. But really taking the step back and looking at everything and asking yourself how we have yet to see one provable example of a Hamas member they claim they've gotten, that they've killed, that they've arrested. All they do is say, oh, they dressed in civilian clothes. We can't tell. So all they're doing then is admitting that we don't know for sure. So we're bombing everybody, which is ultimately what all the evidence shows. All of the artificial intelligence overlaps from Habsora to Lavender, where they admit this, IDF members, from the Hannibal directive, from the people from October 7th, all the way to today, telling you that they continue to shoot at their own people. Every single example. All of the IDF whistleblower that we just played to open, who spoke to corporate media in Britain and said, yeah, we're killing people. I can see it. It's going to sit with me forever. The amount of information that people are ignoring, and it's an increasingly small group of people, is shocking to me. I knew how dishonest these people were. I knew how sociopathic these people were. But I'm actually still shocked to see that they have maintained just blithe disregard to everything we can prove to this point. And again, that makes me fall back to, how is that possible? What do they have on these people? Even though they're willing to lie to no end, still, I would have argued they would have tried to, they're opportunists at the end of the day. They would have tried to find some other way to not have to be caught lying so relentlessly. It's truly shocking, but I think it's important because it's waking people up. This is why they're so desperate to hide, which we won't get into today. I was going to talk about the campus protest a bit. There's still some important things happening there that I want to highlight, but probably tomorrow or the next day when we get into it, I will be playing or getting into that more. But there's a reason that was so aggressively attacked and all the partisan strings were pulled. Got to make it look like it's one side or the other. And right now you've got things in Congress desperately and clumsily trying to make it about only China somehow. TikTok, and can't you prove this? And just really pushing their narratives. And, not that I trust either side of the question and answer, but it's interesting to see how obvious one part of this is. And certainly there could be more parts, but all they can do is point to something else. We all know why. It's very clear what's going on here. Now, I also want to point out, as I said this recently about social media, I was posting this show on Truth Social, and this has happened to me more than once. And again, I hit it, posted all the information, have my hashtags, and I go down to post it, and Gaza had become level Gaza. I don't know if this is something I'm bumping but it's happened more than once now. And I'm interested to see how it pushes it, especially right now of all times. But that becomes the fulfilling point. I just think that's interesting. Just something to consider. But we're going to talk about, to start, a couple of opening interesting points here. Oh, actually, one I wanted to talk about, an update I shared. But a couple of things that are a good amount of things. An opening segment that's sort of like some of the things outside of the conversation of Rafah and the ceasefire that build in the same direction about why we should see what these people truly are. And I'm talking about all of them around the world that are in the same interests. And I'm talking about the United States government, the Israeli government, and plenty of others. It's funny, right? Even right there, if I were to left that open, everybody would assume into what you guys that follow us know what we're talking about. The supranational entities that are the authoritarian governments, the people out there that are absolutely doing the bad things while pretending they're fighting for you and doing all the good in the world. But we're also going to talk about some overlaps with the United Nations, a Human Rights Watch report. And just, I guess the point I made to start is really what this opening part is really. It's just about to show you how undeniably clear it is. And you don't have to take any one of these entities at face value. You just, the combination of your own, what you can see, what, with the reports coming from even Israel or even corporate media or even the United States, in conjunction with all the things that we know we can prove, all the times they've been forced to admit they were lying. And so, again, very telling why those don't pile up, why even the corporate media who pretends to be fighting for truth don't look back and go, time out, 14 times now you've pretended you did this and this didn't happen. But no, because they are clearly being pressured, they engage with each one as if we have to give them the benefit of the doubt. It's clear. If a liar is a liar and they're caught being a liar, you should go into that going, they might be lying, and flavor that with the conversation. Not assume that they are, but very clearly recognize how often, to this very moment, they're being caught lying. That they just throw out another answer, and a lot of times those corporate entities just pick up that answer and run with it next, and that one too becomes a lie, but it doesn't change. But overall, let's get into it for the sake of time. I wanted to start out with just a point to this. I added an update to this. I'm not going to read it just because if you guys want to read, I've pretty much been clear about the updates on the show. I put an update on the Save the Last American Vagabond, Give, Send, Go campaign for those that haven't really been watching the show or missed when I've talked about it. And it really just goes over what we've discussed in how we are in a better place than we were right when we started this, but ultimately that there's still a lot kind of dark looming on the horizon about where this may go. And overall, in general, we still definitely need your support in order to fight off this and whatever else may come and to continue the operations that we are. And I think there's still a lot of great writing and everything that's coming out of this platform, even though honestly, right now, if I was trying to be as safe as possible and make sure that we would just be focusing on this show, and I've decided it's monumentally important, even at my expense, to make sure that we continue the writing of all of them and the article and the interviews and everything. Taylor and Derek and Whitney and Matt and everybody, and Robert, obviously, with what's going on with Israel. And it's so important to see the work and the perspective that they have. Now, anyway, on this note, I just wanted you guys to see that there's an update, and it's kind of a sentiment from my heart as well, just to want you guys to know. Actually, I'll just read that last part because most of you have heard the updates. I just wanted to say that ultimately it's my worry that this whole thing will take the form of attempting to take possession of TLAV or drive it to bankruptcy. And I said, you know me, it is not in me to give up. So we persevere, we stay the course, and have faith that these dishonest people will be held accountable. As soon as my lawyer advises me that I can publicly discuss the frivolous lawsuits, I will be sure to give you guys all the details. You can count on that. And I want this group to be exposed as the ambulance chasers they clearly are. But I want you to know that no matter what happens, I will not stop doing everything in my power to expose the injustices of the world and do my best to hold those behind them to account. I just hope that it will forever be behind this logo right here. As we, you and I, listening right now, built this with our blood, our sweat, our tears. It is our home. I will not give that up without a fight. I can promise you that. And I said, simply see you on the front lines. So in general, if you'd like to continue supporting The Last American Vagabond, this is a great place. I'd like you guys to do it for the recurring donation concept. That's what I'm trying to build here. But elsewhere, we have the donation, the address, and I can't even think of it right now. Buy me a coffee, subscribe star, and all the things in the donation portal on the website. Just a truly heartfelt thank you to all of you out there that have stuck by this platform and continue to support what we're doing. And we're growing every day. We are growing, and I truly believe we're making a difference, guys. That you are making a difference. Now, I'd like to start with a tweet from Matt Nielsen, who highlights what Jeffrey Sachs, or really quote tweets what Jeffrey Sachs, or rather somebody else was quoting him, saying. And I think this is actually pretty powerful. Now, as always, and he shouldn't even have to say this, that, I like a lot of what he says, but there's plenty of stuff that he said that makes me suspicious, or that I wonder whether there's more going on there. But as always, when you highlight a quote or what people say, it's not an endorsement of everything they've ever done, or that we're being tricked by what they may be doing. Two-party illusion nonsense. It's always in the way. But here's what Matt Nielsen says, 1947. That's the year of the National Security Act. That's the year when we went secret. This is ultimately what Jeffrey Sachs was saying too. And now we cannot hold our government accountable because everything is confidential. Really the point there, and I'll read what Jeffrey Sachs is saying, is that I don't know if it was always this way, but at some point, at the very least, if not always, they recognized that you were their adversary. Your government decided at some point that I shouldn't say recognizes, because I don't think we feel that way in most cases. If it was not them doing the things they're doing, I don't think most Americans would perceive, well, we shouldn't, the people that are supposed to represent us to be our adversaries. But everything they've done, at least since this moment, and 47 shows you that they see you as their adversary, or at the very least, potentially. And that goes back to things longer than the United States. The idea that power structures very clearly do see the peoples of their countries as, in some ways, a threat, because they recognize that that's the only way they could truly lose their power, if we recognize we no longer want them in power. And even then, dictatorships, authoritarianism, it's not easy. Sometimes they just say no. And that's where they don't want, in the rules-based international order, these entities that are very clearly authoritarian and very clearly do not care about the things they're pushing, do not want the rest of the world, who may still buy that, to see them that way. It's always a game of psyops and perception. The point, though, is that to think about, like, for instance, saying in multiple documents we've talked about over the years, where your government and the FBI have highlighted that, quote, believing too much in the Constitution represents a possible threat to them. There's really no way to make sense of that as the founding document that they swear an oath to, that somehow you're a threat, other than to realize that they don't believe in or respect what we do. They're using these things. You know, like pretending to be a Republican, or pretending to be a Christian, or pretending to be a Democrat, whatever it is, just to make you think they're on your side, when the reality is the people, whether you disagree politically, are the ones that are technically on your side. The government has never been on your side. And quite frankly, even if you agree with everything they're doing, they're not on your side. That's the whole point of this situation, this relationship. These are people that we put in power, again, based on what it should be in the illusion we're sold, because it's not that way anymore. But the argument being that we put people into power that represent our interests, and we can take them away from that power. That's the whole point of the Constitution. That's a point of, what's the actual phrasing? That basically, if they go against their own interest, that it's the right of the people to alter or abolish it. That's the reality. Now we say that and we're called terrorists. That's also the point. Now here's what Jeffrey Sachs said. Quote, we are on a path to World War III right now, which, interesting enough, whether you agree with that, it seems like that's a pretty, even myself, I've always been very cautious about even floating that, because I don't want to be a fear monger. I don't want to hyperbolically talk. But I mean, I've never, in this whole work, I've been doing this for a long time, a lot longer, have I seen a time where I'm like this, even if it's all hype. It takes one trip, one mistake, one rogue person in Ukraine to suddenly create something real. So it's not hard to see that this is a genuine concern. But he says nothing is explained, nothing's told to us, and we have no choices. That's the truth of where we are, guys, and we need to recognize that. All the partisan screamers are desperate to get you to think, if you just check that box coming up, everything's good. Or it's not for 4 years, and we'll fight to put that person back, and nothing changes. It's the illusion of that very battle is what keeps you thinking that we're fighting for some next step. And all it does is go right back into that same fight, back and forth, teeter-totter. Shouldn't be, doesn't have to be. He says the CIA comes in, conducts the briefings, and off we go to military escalation. The public is profoundly unhappy, and the students are getting beaten up. Faculty are getting arrested because they're not supposed to speak about this. Now, he's not just talking about Israel and Gaza, guys. It says then there's this concoction that this is about anti-Semitism. Give me a break. Now, that clearly is. But actually, quite frankly, there's a lot of other moving parts long before October 7th forward that this was very clearly used to suppress. He says, and this is the important part, I'm a Jewish professor at Columbia University. I actually didn't even put that together that he is actually at Columbia, but it says this is not about anti-Semitism. So again, a Jewish professor at Columbia telling you that's not what's happening, but let's listen to the Israeli government and the U.S. government that have an interest in manipulating you into thinking that's what's happening. He says this is about a slaughter that is taking place in Gaza right now, and the American people don't like it in regard to the protests. They don't like our complicity in it, and they are protesting it. That's what this is about. I 100% agree with that. Even if you think they're misled, even if they don't know all the information around the larger discussions, they recognize a problem by and large, and they want to do something about it. It's amazing that as partisan media and partisan pundits that we choose to attack people like that, just because we think they don't know what we think they should know, as opposed to recognizing that they stand up for something. At least they stand up for something, not just pushing politics that used to drive us back into the hamster wheel of two-party illusions. But my God, it's so frustrating to watch how people get trapped in this ideological what's the word somebody used the other day? Well, they use the term, the ideological dialectic in regard to trapping you into the words that they want us to use. I'll talk about that in a minute. But just this constant trap where we fall right back into thinking one more step, one more vote, one more president. He says, but we don't behave in any reasonable way right now. Let's just put it, the two-party illusion, in my opinion, the people trapped in it, not even to discuss these things honestly, to know the facts, he says, or to have hearings where our executive is called to account by Congress. That doesn't even exist anymore. Congress is fighting itself because you're not allowed to work with the other side, which is a guaranteed way to make sure nothing moves anywhere other than what they all want: war, pro-Israel, suppression of speech, suppression of your rights. He says this was the one of the fundamental roles that Congress was supposed to play. That whole lie about checks and balances. It's laughable to think that this is how anything works right now. It doesn't. He says, I know it doesn't. There is no accountability whatsoever, he says. He says there are closed-door briefings, and then if you approach a congressman or senator, as he says I often do, they say, well, Jeff, I'm just not supposed to talk about such matters, and I'm sure you understand. Not how that's supposed to work. In the meantime, we have our NATO allies talking about moving troops to Ukraine and Russia entering tactical nuclear drills right now. This is crazy. And to be quite frank about this, whatever side you think is on the right side of history, you have to at least be able to understand why Russia would be continually increasing its stance based on the obvious, and I mean like more so than most anything, threat of what Ukraine represents, the people that they're funding. I mean, that's one of those shocking just blatant lies that we've talked about, where on a dime, the very thing that the entirety of corporate media was calling a Nazi threat and a building right-wing thing that Russia's doing in Ukraine all suddenly doesn't exist because now it's our side. I don't know how average people can't see that. I think they can. He says, this is what you read about on the path to World War I, or read about, when a few people decided the fate of the world. He says, we had made a claim that because we are a republic, that we're not technically, we want to be, we should have been, we might have been for a period of time. He says it couldn't happen here. That's the argument. Well, we're a republic. It can't happen here. But starting, is his argument, in 1947, it has been happening here repeatedly. Now, that's actually just a statement of fact. The question is whether you think 1947 was a shifting point or that was an illusion before that, or it's up for you to decide. But it's pretty easy to see that the idea of the National Security Act was one of the moments that I argue is when we shifted into the idea of a centralized power, a federal government, which was what arguably the agreement, that room with the founding fathers, was that would not be where we went, even though it's provable that many of them wanted that. He says that's the year, the National Security Act, 1947, that's the year when we went secret. And now we cannot hold our government accountable because everything is confidential. All right, that's because you're a threat. They recognize in their eyes that you are a threat to their power. So they hide from you and then scream democracy. Now, right now, and we're going to get into this in a later segment, but I just wanted to highlight this in this kind of broad point. Syrian Girl shared this, and I think this is so interesting. The dystopian movies, the idea of social engineering and predictive programming. If you saw the Met Gala, it's actually striking to me, the overlap that she's making here. She says, we're living in the Hunger Games. And on the right, if the podcast, you see a young girl who is screaming in fear, covered in ash because they're bombing her home in Rafah. On the left, I forget what actress this is, frankly, I don't care, dressed in this Hunger Games-esque look. Now, that's just a comparison to put your mind in that point, but realizing that here are people flaunting about overwhelmed with riches and wealth, and to extravagantly dressing, like, the point is, like, when you look at those runway shows and you wonder, like, who the hell wears this crap? It looks ridiculous. It's because it's not meant to, it's about extravagance. And it's flaunting. And the point is that this is happening while they're allowing this. Most people there likely are ignoring what's going on. It's kind of shocking. And this is the point. This is the downfall of our society. This is where we are going. And it's the downfall for everybody but the people in the controlling faction of authoritarian governance. Now, here's a very interesting point that Glenn Greenwald highlighted about, Piers Morgan just really clumsily trying to always look like he's somehow in the, It's just funny. He plays this very interesting role for me right now where he clearly is either just so shockingly uninformed about things, which is kind of hard for me to wrap my mind around, or he's playing this role like he kind of doesn't see it and he's trying to play the middle ground where he's not really attacking Israel, but he's trying to fight for the Palestinians. I just don't buy it. It's either he's uninformed or it's a ploy. That's my personal opinion, but this is a great discussion. Professor John Mearsheimer explains, as Glenn writes, that the most basic realities about the fairy tale understanding that Piers Morgan has of U.S. foreign policy. And this is what we're always trying to highlight. Like what the basic crux of the point is he's saying that that's not the reality. The U.S. government doesn't fight for democracy. He's speaking to a 3-year-old. History proves that, right? But when you say this in the circles of a politics and left-right paradigm, the right would freak out and call you an anti-American terrorist because you highlight the provable reality, right? I mean, and probably in most cases, the left would too right now. But the point is that we don't live in a situation, in a world where our government is some altruistic entity fighting for freedom. It's just provably not the reality. And yet we still are forced to engage with people that act like that, like Piers Morgan. And here, it's so fun to watch this casual, that's not true. And we all know that somewhere in our hearts, we know because we can prove it, but also because you can just look around the world and see the byproducts of what spreading freedom really looks like.
You want to remember that if you look at what's happening in the conventional war, it looks like Putin's going to win, despite the fact that we've now passed this large-scale arms package for Ukraine. Putin is likely to win.
Why is that not a terrible thing for America and the West?
Because you have to prioritize the threats that you face in the world. And the fact of the matter is that what happens in Ukraine does not matter that much to the United States. I know for people like you, this is a life and death matter. The thought of any country on the planet that the West defends losing is a major defeat and has catastrophic consequences. I mean, you felt this way about us pulling out of Afghanistan. But I think that places like Afghanistan, even places like Ukraine, don't matter that much.
Actually, on that, I didn't really. I felt with Afghanistan, America should have kept a small military presence there to maintain some kind of order. And I think I was justified in saying that, given what's happened since. I thought throwing the country back to the Taliban was a catastrophic error of judgment, and it wouldn't have happened in the way it's happened if America kept a couple of thousand troops there.
Yeah, let's just continue occupying a foreign country because we're in charge, right? I mean, that's the kind of imperial mindset. Like, this guy either doesn't recognize how belligerent that is. So they're incapable of having something that doesn't involve violence unless the U.S. violent force is there to not let them be violent, even though history shockingly proves the opposite. And I don't even mean that they'll end up not being violent. I mean that the fact that the U.S. presence stops violence. I mean, how willfully naive can you actually be? This is my point. Does he believe that, or is he just playing a role? Because it's objectively false. And on top of that, the idea that the only reason this country is even in the state it is because of the ongoing multi-generational, multi-agenda destabilization of Afghanistan. Going back to the funding of the Mujahideen, which became, the obvious point from there all the way to ISIS. The reality of what they built allowed, and quite frankly, I think we can prove today that that was deliberate, at least was going back to it later to use it again was very clearly deliberate, not in the interest of fighting the Soviet Union or fighting bad guys in Afghanistan or fighting anything. It's about control.
As it does all around the world in endless bases. So it seemed to me, having done many, many years of hard work in Afghanistan as a response to 9/11.
Yeah, because that's what happened, right? Many years of hard work to accomplish nothing after 20 plus years more. I mean, even the idea of fighting the Taliban, they handed back control to the Taliban. What hard work are you discussing? The complete outsourcing of everything to U.S. interest that then took wealth from Afghanistan, as they put it, defraying the cost of assistance for stealing minerals from the mountains. And or growing opium and pretending we were stopping those things. All the hard work, he says, they put in, which, by the way, perfectly coincided with the explosion of the opioid crisis. These people are shockingly ignorant or lying to you.
Then simply just overnight throw everybody out and leave the country to the Taliban, particularly for women's rights, never mind anything else, I thought was an abrogation of America's duty and the UK.
The duty to continue occupying a country for our interest, or interest of democracy.
Right, but this is your worldview, which is the United States has a responsibility to be everywhere and
Not
to never
everywhere,
quit until
but
it
they should
wins.
certainly be preserving freedom and democracy. Otherwise, why self-style yourself as leader of the free world? You either are leader of the free world, and America still has, I think, half the world's military firepower, and obviously one of the biggest economies. You either are that entity, leader of the free world, or you're not. And if you are, then what comes with that is a responsibility to protect freedom and democracy.
Well, I mean, you think what he's saying? Is this not the most childish thing I've ever heard, or that you've ever heard? By the way, this stream is completely struggling. Let me know if you guys can even hear me. Of course it is, but that it's your responsibility. Who elected you to that position? Why are you just grabbing that and saying we're responsible? We are the policemen of the world, even though every president pretends like they're not going to do that. Because it's power, it's control. And of course, you're not spreading democracy. This ridiculous claim that without that presence, somehow the world would fall apart. The provable reality is that it's the U.S. presence that causes the destabilization for their own interests all around the world.
When it comes under attack from totalitarian, obviously one of the biggest economies, you either are that entity, leader of the free world, or you're not. And if you are, then what comes with that is a responsibility to protect freedom and democracy when it comes under attack from totalitarian regimes.
Okay, is that what you did in Libya or Afghanistan or Iraq or Syria or Venezuela or Bolivia? No. I'd love to see what Pierce thinks is a good example of how that worked out. As a joke I make all the time, they're batting zero. Right? I mean, the idea that you can act like you're spreading freedom and democracy, but oops, I tripped over my shoelaces and destroyed the country, but we'll do better next time. Oh, and we also stole all the resources and, put people in power that work for us. I just can't recognize how anybody can be that willfully naive. It's self-interest.
I think if you look at the history of American foreign policy, it's very hard to make the case that our principal goal has been to protect freedom and democracy. The United States has a rich history of overthrowing democracies around the world, and we have a rich history of siding with some of the world's biggest dictators.
Yep.
So this idea that we're out there protecting freedom and democracy and it's our principal goal, in my opinion, doesn't mesh with reality.
Yeah, or shockingly naive and willfully ignorant would be the right way to say that, right? I mean, I think the only reason this is being said publicly on this show is because we're at a different point right now. Things have shifted, like I keep telling you. And it's not just because of Israel's belligerent genocide, but that's a huge part of it. It's the building of these previous narratives, the illusion around COVID-19 that shook everybody free, the lie about East Palestine, the covering up of all sort of things. It's woken people up. And so he, I guess, feels the courage to say that, or that, I don't know. But at the end of the day, that's correct. To act like this is the opposite is not backed up by the provable evidence. The fact that they've worked with, before they became the boogeyman, Osama bin Laden or Saddam Hussein or any number of groups that they later point to as the bad guy. Or how about the fact that Israel is saying Hamas, Hamas, when they literally funded Hamas for the very purpose of keeping them in power? Like, you can't pretend those don't exist. And I think this is an important thing to recognize, that the truth is there. And it's just time for Americans to recognize that they are not what they pretend to be. Certainly can be. We can make something different. But right now, that's not what's happening. That's why they're ignoring the genocide that everyone in the world can see. Now, Bridget Gabriel, one of these just ridiculous people out there that just say things like this on May 6th while they're literally murdering children with our tax dollars. And she goes, stand with Israel or stand with terrorists. Like straight up just tapping into George Bush, right? Really intelligent, because that's the only two things that exist in this conversation, right? And Tiberius, again, completely ratioing her for the most part. And of course, look, that's the ratio right there. He says, everyone except Israel's a terrorist. This clown. He says, meanwhile, Israel has been murdering children faster than the Holocaust. Maybe these idiots are just on the payroll. And of course, I then posted, well, maybe I have to refresh, this old gem. Are you serious? Oh, here's why. Hold on. I was on the wrong one. Everyone I don't like is Hamas. That's the reality of what they're doing. There's no evidence to make the claim that everybody is a terrorist or you're with Israel. That's pretty silly, isn't it? But doesn't matter. As people who want to believe it will believe it. Now, Decensored News also pointed a great thing out. Now, this is, again, sort of in the larger point of why we are in a very bad way when it comes to what our government actually is. And this doesn't even pertain to Israel. This is about Julian Assange. And I think it's one of the most obvious things to recognize right now, because of all the rest of it, that these people are cowardly, meek. I can't even think of a word harsh enough to describe the kind of person. Well, it's the same thing I'm talking about all the time. A person that will do this, will stand there and preach to you about how good we are and how all the good we're doing. And then except the background is that they're the ones creating all the bad that they pretend they're fighting. Right? In this case, we're talking about the lie, the blatant on-the-face lie by the State Department. Put this out on the 4th, acting like we're fighting, or I think it was the 4th, whatever day was the press freedom day. Imagine how stupid that is, as they're backing a government that just removed an entire organization from being able to broadcast and has murdered hundreds of journalists on the ground, right? Or the fact that the U.S. government is actively trying to arrest, potentially execute, and have tried already one of the journalists that is most famous for exposing their crimes of the U.S. government. You know, and they stand up and they act like we're the good guy fighting for freedom. This is a good clip to show you the overlap, which is something Decensored News does all the time, of this cowardly person called Vattel, who will pretend all day long, just as cowardly as Matt and Miller and all the rest of them. Sure, it's their job, but so too was working for the Nazis. If you want to compare it to something that is doing wrong, not to say that they're Nazis, but the point is that just pretending that I was doing my job, as we all remember, is not an excuse. You are part of the genocide by allowing the genocide, by not just allowing it, by telling us that it's a good thing, that what they're doing is defending themselves. And in regard to Julian Assange, the obvious reality that Sam Husseini and the rest of them point out is that this is a person who exposed your murder with the collateral murder video, and all you have done is tried to keep him in prison while you stand up and pat yourself on the back for fighting for press freedom.
From war zones to oppressive regimes, every day journalists put themselves on the front line in search of the truth.
Can I ask you whether or not the State Department regards Julian Assange as a journalist who would be, covered by the ideas embodied in World Press Freedom Day?
The State Department thinks that Mr. Assange has been charged with serious criminal conduct in the United States in connection with his alleged role in one of the largest compromises of classified information in our nation's history.
It's through their reporting and courage that we become aware of all that is happening across our planet.
I love how they frame the compromising of intelligence. That's the point we're making with the 1947 Act, right? That it's a crime now because you're not allowed to reveal these things they don't want you to see. It no longer truly matters, and this is the reality, whether you're exposing a crime. That's supposed to be the whole thing about whistleblowers, right? If you're exposing a crime, well, it's a protected act. Well, they've just spun nothing but lies around what they claim Assange was involved with to try to paint it as something that it's not. The same way they pretend that all Iran is terrorists, or that the Ansar Allah movement are all a bunch of terrorists fighting for Iran, or none of that is true. They just have to paint it in a way that allows them to break the law.
It's selfless work, and it's essential work.
His actions risked serious harm to U.S. national security, to the benefit of our adversaries. It put named human sources to grave and imminent risk.
Nope, 100% false. Man, that's one of the most important points that they explicitly and painstakingly outlined for people. And when this was beginning, that they, as WikiLeaks always has, took great lengths to make sure that they did not do that. That's why they took time to go through it and worked with these other groups, including corporate media, by the way. They're not in prison, to make sure that they did not reveal those things. That's why it is a group that is, to this day, as far as I could tell, never put something out that's been proven to be false. All they can do is go, oh, it's uncomfortable for the U.S. empire, so he's in jail.
And risk of serious physical harm and arbitrary detention. So it does not matter how we categorize any person, but we view this as something he's been charged with serious criminal conduct.
It doesn't matter how we categorize anybody. That's pretty self-serving. You mean aside from the fact that you use that very thing to categorize average people as terrorists, entire countries as terrorist organizations? Yeah, clearly it matters, only not when you want it to.
Well, but it does matter, actually, and that's my question. Do you believe that he's a journalist or not?
Matt, I'm just not going to offer a prescriptive assessment from here. Our view on Mr. Assange, our view on Mr. Assange is that he's been charged with serious criminal conduct in the United States.
Charged with anything. I just want to know whether or not you, the State Department, regardless of any charges that he faces, believe that he is a journalist or he is something else.
And it's only by knowing that we can work toward achieving progress.
Again, I'm not here to offer a specific assessment. What I will say is that he's been charged with a serious crime, with serious criminal conduct in the United States that has seriously put in harm's way U.S. national security, and that continues to be the case.
They shine a light on injustice. They hold leaders accountable.
They tell the stories needing to be told.
You refer to WikiLeaks allegedly damaging U.S. national security. People might remember that WikiLeaks came to prominence because they released the collateral murder video. And what that showed was U.S. military mowing down Reuters reporters, workers in Iraq.
Today, we honor the journalists who have risked their lives, and for some, lost their lives, in the quest for the truth.
Reuters repeatedly asked the U.S. government to disclose such information about those killings, and the U.S. government repeatedly refused to do so. Only then did we know what happened, that the U.S. helicopter gunship mowed down these Reuters workers through the collateral murder video.
They shine a light on injustice. They hold leaders accountable.
They tell the stories needing to be told.
Are you saying that disclosure of such criminality by the U.S. government impinges U.S. national security?
I was answering a question about Mr. Assange. I was not offering an assessment on anything else.
But you said that WikiLeaks damaged U.S. national security. Did it do so by exposing U.S. criminality?
I'm not going to parse or get into specifics. What I will just reiterate again is that Mr. Assange has been charged with criminal conduct. Whether you're in the briefing room with us or reporting from a country far away,
thank you for using your pen or camera
to help us understand all that's happening in the world.
The WikiLeaks footage will be one of those iconic and graphic moments of history because it shows the full brutality of war.
I believe that if those killings were lawful under the rules of engagement, then the rules of engagement are wrong, deeply wrong.
I just think it's such an important thing to remember. I mean, obviously, this is why we had so many attacks around, the division tactics we always see, right? About the idea that somehow he was working for the CIA, which, by the way, we've never disputed. We always consider. That's what question everything means. But it doesn't mean to blindly believe into what works for a partisan narrative, right? The point is, quite frankly, you can clearly see at this point that there's importance around the things that were shown and importance about how that case gets handled, whether or not you think he works for somebody else. It's about how it's used. And the obvious reality is we should be fighting for that person because of that, whatever your feelings are. Now, in the chat, somebody was asking me about the false account on Telegram. We wanted me to mention, we talked about earlier. I wasn't going to get into it today, but just there's yet again another fake account on Telegram pretending to be TLAV. I didn't bring it up only because I called them out earlier and basically seemed to force them, when I acknowledged them, they seemed to scramble away and try to delete the account. But just on that note, just like with anything else, make sure you recognize that there are people trying to pretend to be us for obvious reasons. But it's important to recognize that our government, or I think personally, and I call me a pessimist, that I think pretty much every government we can point to with given the right power would become exactly what the U.S. government is. I don't believe in the idea of a centralized government. I never have. I believe in there's a lot of the whole conversation to get into that we've had in depth many times about what it would look like in a world without something that we're dealing with today. It's complicated, and the answers there are many, or rather the questions are many, and the answers are few because of how many people out there are so desperately trapped in the idea that we need something like that. But look for the past shows. I've had entire segments on why that's the reality, or how we could, like even going to the extreme, as some people would see it, of extreme lengths, or the idea of building an anarchistic society, which again, even just saying that, people act like you're calling to burn things down. It's such a sad misrepresentation of, as I've put it many times, the one ideology that has no space for government. Weird how they want you to think it means chaos, right? That's always important to think about. But I believe that if you want to understand what anarchism truly is, as we've said many times, it means no rulers, but not no rules. There's clearly structure. It's just not centralized, and that's the main point about it. But on that, we'll digress and go back to the opening segment here about these different realities of all of these governments and how they're not what they pretend to be, and yet they present themselves as some moral arbiter of the world. Here is a new post from Human Rights Watch. This is Omar Shakir, Israel and Palestine director for Human Rights Watch. He says, new Human Rights Watch research shows that Israel used a U.S. weapon to strike an emergency center in Lebanon. Oh, Lebanon. And as I'll read from the actual article. Turns out it was fired from, guess where? Occupied Golan Heights, which is exactly why they wanted that territory. As well, the water and other things they're taking for resources-wise. But guess what they did? They killed 7 aid workers. So in case you're wondering about the dynamic here, about just the conversation of aid workers or aid or humanitarian processes in general, it's not unique and it's been going on long before October 7th. But if you needed something outside of Gaza, recognize that Israel's doing the same thing over there. It says, we found no evidence of a military target, making this an unlawful attack on civilians. Gasp. I mean, it should be, except it's been happening every 30 seconds since for 75 years, quite frankly, but far more since October 7th. It says U.S. and others should suspend arms to Israel. Here's the actual Human Rights Watch article. Israel, U.S. arms used in strike that killed Lebanon aid workers. It's just so disgusting to me that we can have such transparent evidence. And yet it just continues. And all of the worst parts of your government out there, including, in our case, our government, are actively speaking up in support of this, regardless of this information. Why? Because they're defending themselves. Because terrorism. Because you're a racist. It says, in Israeli strike, I guess we could just say Human Rights Watch is Hamas, right? Because that's the equivalent of their dispute. An Israeli strike on an emergency and relief center in South Lebanon on March 27th. Was an unlawful attack on civilians that failed to take all necessary precautions. Human Rights Watch said today. And this was on the 6th, I believe. Oh, it is today. It's the 7th. The strike using a U.S.-made Joint Direct Action Munition, or JDAM, guidance kit and an Israeli-made 500-pound general-purpose bomb killed 7 emergency and relief volunteers from the town of Habrea, 5 kilometers north of the Israeli-occupied Golan Heights. The strike, after midnight, I'm sorry, I guess I mistook that when I read it the first time. Yeah, my mistake. I take that back. I thought when I first read this before, because it was something I added toward the end of my prepping, I thought that read that they fired from there, but I take it back. The area they hit was 5 kilometers north of the illegally occupied Golan Heights that was given to them by Trump, which is why they called it Trump Heights, even though he has no legal jurisdiction to give people's territory away. But it says the strike after midnight targeted a residential structure that housed the Emergency and Relief Corps of the Lebanese Succour Administration, a non-governmental humanitarian organization that provides emergency rescue, first aid training, and relief services in Lebanon. So because it's being done for their adversaries, terrorists, the lot, in the eyes of Israel, or at least that's what they'll say. Somehow connected to Iran, I'm sure. Human Rights Watch found no evidence of a military target at the site. Just a week before, Israel reportedly submitted written assurances to the State Department that U.S.-provided weapons were not being used in violation of international law. And remember, even at that time, we proved to you that their own people were screaming in their ear. We know they're doing that. It's even legal aspect saying U.S. people in the area might be charged with war crimes if this comes to pass. And yet they just ignore it. Matt Miller lies about it. It's not new. If you remember, this was from Amnesty International. This was from October 20th, talking about just between the 7th and 12th of October 2023, that they had committed provably 5 clear war crimes where they targeted civilians, didn't take precautions to avoid them, or I guess that there's a third one, basically failing to take feasible precautions, carrying out indiscriminate attacks, or directly targeting civilians, and proved it. And yet this continued. And now Human Rights Watch as well, proving to you that they are continuing to murder people in Lebanon in the same context, murdering aid workers, proving on the ground, not through secondary information, proving on the ground with their own research that there was no military target. All of them were civilians. And in fact, they were working to do first aid and deliver humanitarian aid that was needed. Murdered. People like Lindsey Graham and whatever that guy's name is that Brian, I forget, the guy that dresses like wears his IDF uniform to Congress, because that's not weird and alarming at all, will openly tell you that none of this matters, or that they're all lying, or it's Iran, or it's fake news because this is Hamas, with zero evidence. These are supposed to be the leaders of the international rules-based order. Freddie Pontone also adds that we just recently highlighted this, but if you have not read this, I'm not going to read it again. It is alarming. They are openly, as he says, we're not dealing with the government, you're dealing with mobsters. It's exactly what Whitney would say. More accurate than you realize. They're openly threatening individually people that work there, the employees of the entire ICC, with sanctions. Random employees and their families and everything else. As always, Mike Pompeo, Bolton, they've done this before. What they're saying is they're openly threatening, if you do this, we'll come after you. Signed by Mitch McConnell, signed by Tom Cotton, signed by pretty much all of the usual suspects, Mark Rubio, Rick Scott, Ted Cruz. And here's what John points out. Yep. Israel lobby total between the lot of them, almost $7 million. Mitch McConnell's doing good over here with $1.95 million in lobbying money that has no influence over what he does. Of course not. Think about this, guys. Don't you think giving Ted Cruz $1.5 million might just have some influence? And I don't realize we just saw what AIPAC did. It's AIPAC we're talking about, when they voted against their interests. This is an important point I just made. The way that the lobbying game is supposed to work, and the way they tell us anyway, is, of course, that they just are giving you money because they support what you believe in your campaign. And, next year around, if we decide that you're not doing what we like, we'll go another direction. Not that they immediately and moment to moment use and give money or pull it back when you don't do exactly what you're told or supposed to. That's what they say. That's not what's happening. Except just now, right in the last couple of days, AIPAC spoke up and said they pulled the funding of every one of these congressmen that did not vote for the emergency aid for Israel. Proving to you yet again that they're using this, as it shouldn't be hard to wrap your mind around, to influence policy of your country in the interest of a foreign government. Rather, a foreign political entity that's controlling another government. Now here, in regard to the mass grave conversation, Asal Rad points out, this is the one speaking, Nadia Bilbasi, asking about this. And I'm still blown away that the way they respond to these things. This is in regard to the 400 people in mass graves and the response that you get from Matt Miller.
Mass graves. Almost 400 people have been buried in mass graves. Some of them, according to the latest UN report, not eyewitnesses on the ground, the UN report or Palestinian media, that they've been buried alive. And some were children, some were women. I know you've been saying that you're a bit slow in writing reports and delivering them on time, but why we've been calling about this investigation? What's holding this investigation? Because, there's serious concern here about 400 people have been rounded and buried, and some have been buried alive.
So we have made clear that Israel needs to continue to be transparent about this issue. Israel has said that with respect to this issue of mass graves, there are places where they were operated where there were mass graves where Palestinians have buried their dead all together, probably because of the extraordinary circumstances in which they have been forced to live. And Israel has come in and exhumed some bodies to try to identify whether there were hostages here. They've gotten intelligence that there were hostages contained in those mass graves. And so
or that's what they told Matt, which Matt dutifully repeats.
They've exhumed them to check that and then rebury them after the fact. We believe they ought to continue to be transparent about what exactly took place, and that'll continue to be our position.
Now, what's interesting, as usual, is that's the story that they ended up on. If you've watched this, and you have because you're watching our show and plenty others, I imagine, they said about 4 different things around this. And I'm talking from high-level government positions, from Netanyahu to the general, where they come out, or even someone like Elon Levy, who's not technically one of these positions, but is still aggressively propagandizing for the topic. What'd they say? First, it wasn't us. It was Hamas. They killed them all, right? Or it turns out that they were Palestinian bodies that they buried. And the narrative shifted back and forth until they kind of center around what, as we keep saying, they threw it all at the wall. And they're like, okay, what are you buying? That one? Got it. That's the one. That's our story. And Matt Miller comes out and says it because he's fighting for the truth. I mean, Rick, just look at that face right now. I mean, it's so clear. It's not even about being clear. We can prove that they're lying. And one of the main things that they say here in the tweet, so Palestinians buried their dead zip-tied? Of course, all they're going to say is, well, Hamas. Whoa, okay, so you could prove that? No. Okay, so you don't know why they were zip-tied, but your assumption is that it must have been Hamas. That's the game that gets played. You don't just get to blindly assume into what works for what you're saying. If they're zip-tied, we have to ask whether that's, and of course, we realize that that's what the Israeli government has been doing on every video where they arrest, in quotes, Palestinians. What do? Blindfold them, zip-tie their hands, and every time we've seen examples of where they ended up dead. Here is the UN article. Mass graves in Gaza show victims' hands were tied, says UN's rights office. And yet again, let's not forget that we have doctors, one of which, who, by the way, I guess is right now in Rafah, Nick Maynard, who went back. After all that, he went back to Gaza. Think about the courage that takes. Even though he watched doctors get killed in front of him, and now but who knows what's going to happen? Quite frankly, I think that that's the kind of person that they will go after because he's been clear about things like this.
Every single part of the hospital has been destroyed. The whole infrastructure of the hospital has been destroyed. When I spoke to Marwan yesterday, he told me there were 107 patients still in the hospital, 60 medical staff. God only knows what has happened to them. I think we've seen some of the pictures. Surgeons I know have been executed in the last 48 hours there. Bodies have been discovered in the last 12 to 24 hours who have been handcuffed with their arms behind their back. And so there is no doubt at all that multiple healthcare workers have been executed there in the last few days.
You believe executed by whom, Doctor?
By the Israeli Defense Force.
Why would they seek to execute surgeons and medical professionals?
Well, they've been doing it since October the 7th. Over 450 healthcare workers have been killed. Friends of mine that I have worked with over the years, many have been abducted as well, and nothing has been heard of them since. So there is no doubt in my mind, and I can bear witness from this from my time at Al-Aqsa Hospital and from talking to people, that there's been direct targeting of the healthcare system in Gaza, direct targeting of hospitals, and multiple killings of healthcare workers.
Any death is tragic, but this is not, and I say again, anyone dying in any sense. So this is not, and please don't be upset by this expression, collateral damage. This is specifically targeted, you're saying, medical professionals by the IDF to be taken off and executed, is your belief?
Most certainly, that is my belief.
Have you at any time seen anything that would lead you to believe that there had been terrorists who were hiding in the hospital?
Without exception, every single one has responded to say they have never witnessed any Hamas militant in the hospitals they have worked in.
Now that discussion was before the mass grave, the bigger point, the most recent example that got a lot of attention. He was saying this before that started to get attention. Saying and understand when he says that's my belief, what he's talking about is why they were doing it, and that they were doing it to take them off and kill them. And the point is, he's seen them shoot them, seen them take them off. And again, it was a Euromed human rights group reported that they've proven 141 of those IDF mass graves. 141. For the podcast, I'll include the show. We discussed this with all the source materials, so you can look at it for yourself, as usual. This is undeniably obvious. Now, in general, again, there's an Amnesty International from November 8th. We've shown you this as well. This is in both the West Bank and in Gaza. And by the way, in Israeli detention centers. Horrifying cases of torture and degrading treatment of Palestinians amid a spike in arbitrary arrests. It's not that hard to recognize that they're killing these people. Again, the UN has made these statements. So too have the human rights groups, doctors that have seen it. And yet we're all just going to listen to what the IDF, who's responsible, wants you to believe is happening. Even though, as I said in the beginning, and again, not even just women and children, just examples of innocent people, one after another, human rights groups, United Nations, even their own allies calling out what's happening, and all they say is human shields. Again, without a single example of and again, the images of what they claim are somebody shooting this from the hospital, which, by the way, ended up later being debunked, is not even what I'm talking about. I'm talking about a provable example of in real time somebody who gets killed. Oh, here they are. We trapped the guy or we killed him, and here's his body of a Hamas member alongside all the civilians they kill. All we get is all the civilians, and they go, well, human shields. Well, where are the Hamas members then? We're just supposed to take that on credit? Just supposed to go, okay, then you must be knowing what's going on. I just can't wrap my mind about how anybody can do that. Here is another UN article. This is from May 6th. Onslaught of violence against women and children in Gaza, unacceptable. Which I guarantee is making the Zionists seethe with anger, because all they want them to do is report the lies they've been spinning about what's happening to people on October 7th and nothing else, even though they keep getting caught lying about it. You can prove this with an endless string of provable information, provable witnesses, provable testimony, historical documentation that this is what they've been doing. Not that every Jew or every Israeli supports it, but clearly that it's been happening and that they do have mass support, not just from their own country, which is pretty disgusting. Now, one other point I want to make for this opening segment is the very important discussion that needs to be had. And now, look, I definitely could be wrong. I do not think I am. And I'll show you that I think this point proves that, even if the ratio I could be wrong about, which is the point that it's obvious to me, as I think it should be to anybody, that there is a lot of Jewish people, even just Israelis that aren't Jewish, that do not believe Zionism is Judaism, do not believe the state of Israel represents every Israeli or every Jew, or specifically every Jew in that context, because technically Israel would be the representative of Israel. That's the government. That's how it should be. America represents Americans, not all Christians. But the point is that I think it's very clear that at the very least, a lot, which, could be a few percentile if you think, but that's still a hell of a lot of people, do not think that. So my point is that you can't say that they are the same thing, or that everybody, every Jew, it's broad stroking. It's ignorance. We should not do that. I'll come back to this video in a minute about them praying before they enter Rafah and what they say, which is ultimately that they want to destroy Rafah. But Gilad points out, he says, for those good people who tell us that Judaism is not Zionism, you look at this and please try to point out where exactly Zionism ends and Judaism starts. No, I'm not even saying he's wrong to have that opinion. I could very well be wrong. But I find it really hard to believe that we can't, or that he can't, that we just don't recognize the groups that are protesting this, who are Jewish. Doesn't that then make the point that it's not everybody, or this idea that we're looking at a video full of IDF members who are, just because they're there and they're praying, this somehow means that they are all Jewish, that they're all Zionist? We don't know what they believe. They're standing there they're doing this. Bottom line, I said, I don't get why this is so difficult for some. There are Jewish people, Jewish groups, many in fact, who do not support Zionism. Now, many does not mean the majority, but there's a lot of people, and it's clear. There's huge groups, multinational. And I said, there's your answer. It may be the vast majority who do, but an honest person cannot claim they're the same if we accept the obvious reality of my point. And this person says there are a small amount of, quote, good Jews, he says, who are condemning Zionism. The majority of Jews globally are overwhelmingly in support of the illegal, racist, apartheid, and brutal squatter colony of Palestinian land. And I said, even if that is true, and I disagree, it still makes my point. It makes the point that overall what we're talking about is some that do not. So again, you just can't make this broad stroking point. I mean, you can, but realize that you're wrong, because not every Jew in the world feels that way. Now, the other point to make here, and again, you could argue that these people have good intentions. They just are, maybe they're right, I'm wrong, but in my opinion, that they're wrong in the overview of how many people, and the idea that they're highlighting specific religion as the problem, like that is always a problem for me. But my point is that we've already been warned about this by people. I forget exactly who that was. I believe it was somebody prominent in Israeli society. The point was they're basically saying that they see this creeping narrative now, where you're going to start to see that's in the interest of Zionism to create the illusion of anti-Semitism. People, like I would argue, like a Jackson Hinkle out there, or somebody like that, whether they know it or not, who are going to suddenly start shifting into going, you know what, we just got to say the Jews, that it's the Jew, and turn it into that alone. Because then that becomes, aha, we knew it. That's what everyone, and even if you think that, recognize how you're being played into making this an all-encompassing one, everybody who is Jewish, therefore is bad. Now, I don't think anybody, even people that believe what they're saying here, can argue that and be honest. If you can admit, as they just did, that there is some that don't. Now, maybe I'm beating a dead horse, but I think it's important that we recognize that distinction, because there is coming, and it's already happening, a ploy that's going to try to drive us into dividing, even amongst the group of people like this that recognize that Zionism, or if maybe they think it's all, the point is that we can see a problem of people that are doing what they're doing in Gaza and the ideology they're pushing around the world. It's important. And I think the major point, as Alon Mizrahi points out, is that this is going to be used to divide the people that truly see the problem. And he says, I'm deeply, deeply shamed and angry that for many, now this is an Israeli Jew who lives in Israel, who's calling this out. He says, these people are, he says that I'm deeply shamed and angry that for many, many people, these faces of laughing Jewish kids at a woman who was just displaced from her home will come to represent Jews. These people are not only evil, he says, they are idiots lacking any sense of historical awareness. He says they don't have the slightest idea people will remember this long after there is no more USA, Israel, or European Union. Now, I actually think this is an old image. I could be wrong, but it's kind of irrelevant for the point. Simon Godek just points out, settlers making fun of Palestinian woman after the occupation authorities forced her out of her home in Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood in Jerusalem. Which side are you on? Now, this, again, you could take that as Muslim versus Jew, but I think it's the point that is obviously about right and wrong. The fact that you have a group that is laughing at the suffering of another person simply because of who they are. That's hatred. That's bigotry. That's racism. But again, I think this is important. And Torah Jews, as I usually talk about the Torah Judaism group, which is a different group, says Israel's Yom HaShoah solemn celebration is another act of fabrication. And this is a Judaism group, probably more multinational. It says Israel's leaders exploited the suffering of European Jewry to advance their post-war statehood goals. And we've talked about this. The CIA's documentation highlights that they were willing to sacrifice Arab Jews to accomplish what they wanted. Grab that real quick, just in case people, because that, these kind of claims are the things that typically people would completely disregard without even looking to find out if it's true until you shove it in their face and show them, and they still probably will ignore it. But the documents very clearly right here, and you can hopefully watch the show because I go into it in depth, where they highlight this fact. And it's a CIA.gov document where they literally highlight the fact that the Jewish agency is apparently willing to sacrifice Jews residing in Arab countries, and it's for their own interests. That's Zionism. But he says they did little to rescue our brethren trapped in the Holocaust furnace. And of course, Dan Cohen highlights the fact that their own Haaretz article and historical reality is that the Zionist entities, the Lehi Party in particular, was working and did align themselves with Nazi Germany well past the final solution. It's the same thing with Rwanda and plenty of other genocides where they were involved from the beginning, the middle, and the end, and we just ignore that because politics. It says, like today, they view the innocent lives taken during war as a price to pay for Zionism. This is why we highlight the fact that Jews in general are being used by Zionism, and many of them are beginning to realize that. The politicizing anti-Semitism is another avenue explored by Zionists to ensure Jews remain in a perpetual state of fear, all to indoctrinate us that Jews need the Zionists to save us. So let's stop and read the words of our alleged saviors and what they did not do to alleviate the crushing suffering of our parents during the Holocaust. Now, you can read this for yourself. But they're getting into in this just in time. I'll probably come back to that actually. But it's discussing what they were. It's all on the record, guys. What Zionists truly believed. The fact that Herzl himself was an atheist. The reality that they were enthusiastic about their settler colonialism. It's obvious. Include this for you to read or watch. Now, finally, Zachary Foster, who's also Jewish, who is a historian of Palestinian history from Princeton, has a PhD. He says Meta employees have published a petition in which they indicate a proposed policy at Meta to treat the word Zionist as a proxy for Jewish. It's not. Other than I think people that are trying to conflate that. And I see that as a growing problem because they are not the same thing, even if you think most Jews believe in Zionism. It says, hey, Meta, he writes, the overwhelming, and this is his claim, which I find interesting, the overwhelming majority of Zionists are non-Jewish. He says tens of millions of American evangelicals are Zionist. You're going to falsely label them all Jews? While many hundreds of thousands, millions of Jews do not identify as Zionist? He said, and this is a guy who has a PhD in this history. He says that's because the two ideologies have nothing to do with each other. Judaism is a 3,000 plus year old anti-fragile religion. Zionism is a 140-year-old extremely fragile political ideology. If you treat one as a proxy for the other, you falsely are labeling millions of people something they are not. But that's the point. It's about creating the divide. It's about creating the justification to suppress speech, everything we've talked about. So I just don't know how you could factor that information in with the idea that one equals the other. And what's also interesting is the people over here, which, potentially are doing so with good intentions, are trying to highlight that that they are the same thing. And they're pointing out that Israel's a problem. It's weird that they're saying the same thing Israel is, who is telling you that they are the same thing. Does that seem like an interesting overlap? If they seem like they're at odds, maybe they're not. I mean, we have to consider these points. Now, getting into first, the humanitarian aid, the famine, the lies around this, which then kind of dovetails with the idea as usual of the hostages and the ceasefire, and then which goes into the reality of what's happening in Rafah. So first, this is an article from NPR, just showing you corporate media on May 4th, saying senior UN official says northern Gaza is now, not will be, is now in full-blown famine. We shouldn't need them to say that, seeing as how the groups that are charged with identifying the different levels of starvation, both of them have labeled this a 5 out of 5. Right? So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5 the highest level of absolute famine, and that's where they've said this is. We know this is happening. All you get is people like Elon Levy who want to yell you down from acknowledging that they're starving children for fun or for whatever agenda they're trying to accomplish, but while dancing and having parties, just in case we don't understand what that means. Now, here is Philip Lazzarini from UNRWA saying, and this is posted on the 5th, like how long this has been going on, this lie back and forth. Same thing with the dumb ceasefire conversation, the lie, the blatant misrepresentation about the obvious dynamic, the fact that they knew that they offered them something that they didn't expect them to take, and they did, and they acted like, you're lying, and just backed away and bombed Rafah. Like, it's just so clumsy and childish. And they know we can see it, and yet they trot Matt Miller out to say they didn't even accept it, Hamas, even though they did. And it's easy to prove. But before we get to that, he says the Israeli authorities continue to deny humanitarian access to the United Nations. And then they turn around and say, they're not letting enough in. We're putting it in front of them, and they're not doing anything with it. Except when they try to, they won't let them, or they shoot them because they claim they're Hamas. It's very easy to see how this contradiction works. He says just this week, they have denied for the second time, specifically Philip Lazzarini, who is the Commissioner General of UNRWA. He says his entry to Gaza, where he had planned to be with their UNRWA teams, including those on the front lines. Again, think of the courage that takes where he knows they're shooting them. The past, while recorded an increase in the denial of humanitarian access and attacks on humanitarian workers and convoys, right? So they've seen, he meant the past while, like so in the recent history, the last couple of weeks or months, they have seen an increase in denial while being called out for not doing it and claiming they're increasing it. They've actually increased the denial. And this overlaps exactly with Rafah, because I'm going to show you in a minute that they are not just blocking their way out, but now blocking the access of any food at all that could come in and beginning the operation. How do you not see that as a guaranteed way to take as many out as they can? Even though there are people that are fleeing into Al-Mawasi in different areas, they've been bombing Al-Mawasi and other places this whole time. That's the safe area, like the rest of them were always going to be, and they bombed those too. It says only in the past 2 weeks, Lazzarini continues, we have recorded 10 incidents involving shooting at convoys. 10! Arrest of UN staff, including bullying, stripping them naked, threats with arms, and long delays at checkpoints, forcing convoys to move during the Dark War. That would be probably even the focus of everything I talked about if it wasn't for all the other things going on. I didn't even know that until he reported it. And the problem is that, and it's not a problem. I mean, it is, all this is problems, all of them have problems, but that the campus protest and, it's just crazy how much very real suffering and death is happening, but almost as a distraction from something else. It could be. The bottom line is shootings at these convoys in the previous examples were huge stories. arresting UN staff, stripping them naked. I mean, how is that not a gigantic story? It's only because these pretend that, fake defenders of liberty, including the US government, act like they're fighting for freedom and defending the right, school, everything they claim, while willfully ignoring that. Willfully ignoring the attacking and murdering and suppression of Americans, Palestinian or otherwise. Journalists like Shireen Abu Akleh, who they watched murder, didn't care. This is what they think of you. They're allowing this. Just like with the USS Liberty, the reality of what they actually care about is not hard to see. It says these incidents happen repeatedly. It says at the time we are engaged in a race against the clock to avert famine. That's exactly the point. It's about an illusion to maintain the famine. It is also, he says, it also creates fear among courageous and committed humanitarian teams because they know they're going to get shot at. Since the beginning of the war, he says, the UN, including UNRWA and other humanitarian personnel, premises, and operations have been blatantly disregarded. Today, Palestinian armed groups launched rockets at Karim Shalom crossing, causing its closure. We'll get to that in a minute. Now, this is what's being reported regarding whether or not it was that caused that or that it was. We'll get into in a minute. But the point is, it's obvious what they're doing. And it's obvious that they're bombing, as we'll prove to you in a minute, military installations that are being put up in order to do what they're doing in Rafah. It says it is used for humanitarian deliveries. He says, I demand an independent investigation and accountability for the blatant disregard of humanitarian workers, operations, and facilities, all protected under international law. To do otherwise would set a dangerous precedent and compromise humanitarian work around the world. He says, I call on Israeli authorities to facilitate humanitarian access across the Gaza Strip, including the north, but they don't care. They've been saying this for months, and they pretend that they are, and they're lying about it. He says, I also call on Hamas and other groups to stop any attacks on humanitarian crossings, refrain from aid diversion, and make sure assistance reaches all those in need. The denial of humanitarian access is a violation of humanitarian law. So the two parts here is one that is very clear, nonstop, right to this moment. Israel is absolutely stopping, hindering, suppressing any aid while pretending they're increasing it, actually increasing the denial. But he points out there was the crossing we were going to discuss yesterday. And it's important to understand what actually is going on in regard to where they bombed and what they were aiming at. But nonetheless, it did result in Israel closing down the crossing. So it's the same point. He's just simply saying that we should stop this to make sure aid gets through because that's his only concern. But it's important to understand who closed the crossing and why it happened. The first part that they used, I argue, intentionally to do what they wanted already, which was to stop more aid. Now, here it was Brian Mast, who I was trying to remember earlier. Just quickly on UNRWA, this is the kind of shameless lie that we keep seeing. He says Joe Biden handed over more than $121 million to UNRWA. The United Nations humanitarian group has been doing good work for Palestinians for decades and maintaining the right of return record that people like Brian Mast are desperate to hide from you. He says even when it was clear the agency's employees took part in October 7th attacks. That's what he just said. You know the reality, right? The fact that every group, even the United Nations, or rather even the United States in many cases, have acknowledged this. Canada, Israel yet to show evidence UNRWA staff are members of the terrorist group. This was April 22nd, 2024. Nothing new has changed now. Here is The Guardian. Israel still has no proof UNRWA terrorist claims, but damage to aid agency is done. This is April 2024. And what they're saying is the damage was done to the group despite evidence because propaganda, right? This was NPR, I believe. Report on UNRWA concludes Israel has not provided evidence of employees' militancy. Another Guardian, Israel has yet to provide evidence of UNRWA staff claims. I mean, it's on and on and on. And now you could argue that maybe it's still true. My point is a person in power in Congress knowingly lying because that's what he wants to side with, probably because he's literally in their military. He says, my new bipartisan bill would force the State Department to do everything it can to recoup this money. So during open starvation tactics and obvious genocide, you want to yank back money from the group that's trying to feed these people, for freedom and democracy. Obviously, that's not what he's doing. These people are maniacs. I said, you are a clown, a shamelessly lying clown. He doesn't care. He literally doesn't care. Now, Francesca Albanese from the United Nations, who he would blithely call a Hamas member because he's that ignorant, says, what I've seen rejected, in quotes, by Israel and stored in warehouses in northern Sinai is not just critical support for survival of Gaza. It is that, but it's the solidarity of so many people around the world, as you can see in the pictures from Brazil, from France, from Kuwait, from Singapore. But they just sit there and rot. Because Hamas. No, because Israel has yet to even begin to, not only does it just sit there, but the process gets delayed by these restrictions, by the fact that they hold it up for days. Imagine waiting in these lines for multiple days and then getting turned back because you have a blanket or gauze. All things that have been turned down for God knows why, obviously because they're trying to hurt these people. And I showed you a couple of these just yesterday, but, Mohammed Safa pointing out what these people are dealing with. You just can't deny what you're looking at, guys. That's not fake news. It's easy to prove. 245 calories. Children in Gaza have only 245 calories a day. Now, Ahmad Siwahili pointed this out yesterday. Urgent. He says, I can confirm that British aid workers are being bombed at the Rafah border now. See, just like with Lebanon, just like the World Central Kitchen, just like the flour massacre, it's not hard to recognize consistency here, guys. They're bombing aid workers. And Israel and Egypt are refusing to open the border to allow them to leave. The British government and the others he mentions here are responsible for their safety. They must secure their evacuation immediately. But we know what's happening. They don't care. Now, he added to that today. He said, I can now reveal that it was, in fact, actually Oxford professor Nick Maynard, who we just talked about, who was stuck in the midst of the bombing. So right there, guys, for all we know, they were trying to kill this person. Either way, we're talking about a doctor internationally there to work for anybody that's in need, and he almost got murdered by bombing. Is that pinpoint targeting only Hamas? Clearly not. He is now safe in Cairo, thank God. He spoke to BBC Radio, and you can listen to it right here. It's really just kind of overview, but you can listen to it. It's important to hear what's going on. Think about how wild that is. Now let's get into some of the lies coming from the same old liars. COGAT, a group that's literally in their byline says coordinating, facilitating humanitarian aid, as they routinely lie about doing that. They say, and here's the funniest, the most disgusting, macabre part about it. So far, 68 trucks were transferred today. Oh yeah, 60 out of 500 that you never meet anymore is the obvious lie that you pretend you're doing good. Just because, look, I'm not even sure that any made it through, quite frankly, but let's pretend like they are, which I kind of believe that's happening for the very illusion they're doing good. Like when they give bottles to people and then shoot them after the camera stops, or help an old man across the street and then shoot him in the back, which all these have been proven, even by human rights groups. These are terrible people we're talking about, willfully trying to pretend to be good and then with such hatred, murdering that same person. The point is that 68 trucks is 500 a day before October 7th was not meeting their needs. And that's just humanitarian aid in general. They're not even remotely meeting the needs. And the point is, as many have highlighted, that let's just say you were doing 500 a day right now, which even then was not meeting their needs. They were food insecure before October 7th. The point would be that they, in starvation, in famine, in absolute famine, they need not just food. They need support. They need medical treatment. But on top of that, they need a hell of a lot more food, but it's not being done. They're systematically driving them into starvation and already there. Alistair Bunkall says, update. First of all, this is the point. It says Action Aid, this is today, says, or rather, I think it was or late last night. It was early this morning. They write, Action Aid says no aid, zero, is getting into Gaza. Why? Because all the crossings are closed. A group that is highlighting these things and focusing on them, right? But then the writer from Sky News, of course, goes, update. IDF and COGAT said that's not true. End of story. So here's what we get. We get people on the ground, investigation, human rights groups, United Nations, average Palestine. Everybody, it's not happening. They're closed. They're not even letting it in. And then you just go, yes, we are. Report that. And Sky News does what they're told. That's pretty stupid, isn't it? And that's what then COGAT goes, so far, 68 trucks, because we say so. Well, first of all, again, this is all the way up until day 2. This is from May 6th. Remember that even the United Nations makes it clear that the pre-crisis average of humanitarian aid in general was 500 trucks every day. Again, including fuel. All said and done, humanitarian aid. Here, all said and done, humanitarian aid is what they've been bringing in the entire time. Made sure they started off with about 2-3 weeks of hardcore zero aid, making sure they really kicked off that starvation tactic, and then just barely trickled it in. About a fifth of what they might need to kind of average all the way until maybe even April. Look at what you're staring at, guys. The blue numbers here for the aren't in the podcast. You can see that's the daily average. Okay. At most, you get to about 173 all the way until April. That's an average per day, where before it was 500 and they were not meeting their needs. I've made this point many times, but this is how easy it is to prove that they're lying. And here's the point, is they pretend on one side of it, which Elon does every day, we're letting in more than they could possibly need, except then when it really gets exposed, they go, no, it's not, but it's Hamas's fault. They're stopping it. Or alternatively, UNRWA just hasn't been picking it up. You'll see those oscillating excuses all in the same day. That's how ridiculous this is. But this is provable. Now, here is a big jump in May. And this is daily total. But let's realize 340 is still shockingly less than 500, which before was still food insecure, and now they're at famine. So 340 is an insult. 290 is an insult. All of these are insults. This is an illusion, as even they said, the bare minimum necessary. But even then, they're not doing that. The bare minimum necessary would at least be 500. It's not. This is from May 6th. So here they are saying, by the way, 68 trucks so far on the 7th. And we can't see the 7th, right? But my point is, you can go back and look at the excuses they were making before. As Elon Levy said, 500, no single point ever have they crossed 500. Elon Levy more than once has made those claims. So they're lying. I'm willing to bet you, even if you go back and look at this claim from Kogat by tomorrow, it probably won't even be remotely true. Like all said and done, what they claim throughout the day. How many times have we proven this? Now here is the interesting overlap, right? So this one says, so far 68 trucks have gone through the crossing. So they're saying, no, it's open. And they're saying, and this is them saying, no, they told me it's open, right? Here's Elon Levy saying the intensified attack on Rafah didn't lead to the closure of the Kareem crossing, through which more food is entering than before the war. That's a lie. 100% provable. We literally just showed you. There's not a single moment this entire time where they have brought in more than before the war. He just makes up these fake numbers and highlights some fake graphs, which we can you don't need anything else. This is the overview right there, directly from the United Nations. He pretends he's citing the United Nations and says something else. You can work that out for yourself. But he says the fact that Hamas keeps stealing it or shelling it, they killed 4 of our soldiers. Okay, so what's the real narrative here? All right, oops, I went back the wrong one. Right, are we talking about the idea that they're being attacked by Hamas, and that's why they can't get it through? Or are you delivering it to the front and it's sitting there because the UN doesn't do its job? Or is just enough going through in general and they're all lying about it? All 3 of those have been stated. My point is the open and ongoing constant contradictions, when you can readily prove that this is not true across the board. On top of the fact that Kogat, as I've shown you many times, has already been caught lying about this exact concept. And by the way, remember I showed you this last time? For those that have watched long enough will remember. Now they've even taken away that little one thing that says, alert with a little orange thing on it, which, by the way, is very different than the same person over here sharing the same video that says, oh, fake news. The reality is the bakery in the video was bombed and destroyed back in October. And he's posting this. Well, he's claiming it's from February. Posting this in February 10th. And it's from Kogat. Look at that. And that's the point, guys. Kogat is lying. They're posting this claiming 20 bakeries operational. And they're saying this came from Nusrat at a time when we can prove that it's gone. Look. I mean, I don't know why we need anything else. This is a group pretending to fight for humanitarian aid that is willfully lying to you about humanitarian aid every single day. That's just the example I've used because it's so easy to recognize. Now, also recognize that there are currently Israelis who are standing in front of the aid convoys that Elon says are coming through without any problem, throwing aid off the trucks into the ground and destroying them. That's what's happening. I don't know how we pretend that's not part of the conversation.
פיצצו לו את הגלגל ואת הדלק. וואי וואי וואי, ככה הוא תקוע, ככה צריך לעשות לכל
you have to realize this is absolutely being allowed, if not facilitated by the Israeli government. Because they can't get to these places without, I mean, this should be, well, the bottom line is, in some cases, they're in places where they have to be let in, but overall, this should be controlled and protected, right? That if you're pretending that the group that you call Hamas is supposed to be there protecting this in an area which you control, how do you explain that? One side or the other, that doesn't make sense. The point is, Israel's supposed to be protecting these. It's in their crossing. They're not. They're letting random settlers come in and destroy the trucks while pretending like everything's happening the way it should. It's just this kind of willful disregard. The obvious reality is slapping us in the face. Now here, the height of insanity says this is the same discussion whilst they're doing this, blocking the trucks while celebrating the airstrikes on Rafah. Literally dancing and singing in front of blocking the aid while children are starving to death. That's what's happening. Now, to get into the overlap of the Karim Shalom crossing, Kogat, 13 hours ago, said earlier today, and this is for the second time, as they're claiming anyway, the main humanitarian aid crossing into Gaza, the Karim Shalom, even though already proving that they are not doing what they're supposed to. This is just an excuse, in my opinion, to shut it down because they didn't even bomb the location where this is talked about. It says this is the second time this week that they've actively shot at the Karim Shalom. Hamas will do anything to prevent aid. This is the game they're playing, despite the fact that they're lying about doing that, and Hamas in no way has been shown in any way to be suppressing the aid. Not that I can see. The videos I've seen in the past where they show them grabbing trucks, you could argue that that's them simply doing to deliver that. Or my point is, you can't prove that anything's happening the way they say it is. I have no reason to doubt that Hamas in any circumstance would do any of the things they're claiming, because obviously we have to remember that Israel funds them to have in the past, and I argue in the leadership do to this day. So that has to be flavored. It's not one thing or the other. It's kind of a multifaceted problem. But the point is that just like the human shields, where's the evidence? And again, when that oscillates between UNRWA is not doing its job by delivering it, or that they're destroying it, or, all these narratives at the same time, clearly one of them is a lie. But here's the point. He says it's almost like Hamas is trying to stop humanitarian aid from getting to Gaza because it wants a humanitarian crisis that will... Yeah, real pithy answer. It's silly to make the argument that you can't prove when we can prove that you are lying about that, or lying about your aid coming in the way it should, and every other group in the world is also calling that out. Emmanuel writes, the IDF announces the death of a fourth soldier, this was yesterday, in claimed rocket attack against the staging area near Karim Shalom. So here's what's hilarious to me. He is claiming this. Using this and making a point. He said, it makes my blood boil. Despite Hamas attacking Karim Shalom on October 7th, Israel has scaled up operations to let far more aid in. No, you're a liar. We just proved that. He says, then before the war. Just can't stop making that lie. And but don't forget, by the way, that's exactly the lie that got him fired, because he bumped up against David Cameron and made him look stupid, and they fired Elon for it. Imagine being fired by the Israeli government for lying. Think about how silly that is. He says, how does Hamas respond? By shooting rockets at the aid crossing. Okay. God, it's crazy. Did you even read it? They report, by the way, who is a military correspondent for the Times of Israel, that they have announced the death of a soldier with a rocket attack against a staging ground near the Karim Shalom crossing. Oops. This is how stupid this guy is. You can't even read that to recognize that it contradicts your larger narrative, or you don't care. And obviously we're talking about military presence. Are you telling us you have a strong, let's just say they do have a military presence at the crossing. This guy is admitting that that's not where it was. We also know that we're going to show you next that they were building for the Rafah invasion that they're currently beginning. And that's what they were bombing. Ignoring all of that as well, let's not forget that we're talking about an occupied area, which means they have the legal right to armed resistance. And every one of these are talking about military targets. So it doesn't even matter anyway. It's a legal act of armed resistance, regardless of how upsetting that is to Israelis. Here is the next tweet from Elon saying, UNRWA said, the continued interruption of the entry of aid and fuel supplies at the Rafah crossing will halt the critical humanitarian response. Which, by the way, we'll get to. They just took the Rafah crossing as well as the entire area across there because they're about to do a lot worse. But he goes, since UNRWA has such close ties with Hamas, oops, you mean the thing we just literally proved you're lying about? Or that every government, even your allies, has said you've never proven? Doesn't matter. It's just about narrative control. Has it considered telling Hamas to not keep shooting mortars at this crossing? Okay, well, is it Hamas now? Or didn't you just say that it was because they weren't delivering it? Or is it because it's not there? Just keep throwing it at the wall. Whatever works for you in the moment, Elon. But here's the interesting part. This was from the 5th. Hamas attacked the Kareem Shalom crossing, he says, for humanitarian aid, claimed the lives of 3 soldiers. They immediately jumped at this to try to take advantage. And I always want to show you how interesting it is. Look at the exact framing, the emojis, and here's Evie McClumpus. Almost nearly identical. I guess that's just coincidence, right? No, they're all getting they're tweeted, they're part of the app that they've all admitted they use, which is directly tied into the Hasbara, Israeli propaganda scream, where they just go, here's what you're supposed to say about this, and they dump it out. That's exactly what's happening. I mean, how can you miss that? But here's what somebody responded, saying Hamas did not attack the crossing. They attacked the military base. Stop your lies. No, you should blindly take anybody's word on Twitter, but it is true. We'll show you next. But people saw it, called it out. Sarah says tanks and military vehicles or humanitarian aid? Oops. Because that's what's happening. That's what we're dealing with. And here's the point that somebody else made as well, we'll get to. There's a very big difference between the crossing for aid and the location that they bombed. As even the writer for Times of Israel made very clear, it was a staging area near the crossing. Next, Elon Levy says, with all due respect to Israel shuttering Al Jazeera, which we talked about yesterday, which is just another example of how completely authoritarian and, don't believe in any of the things they pretend they fight for. Press freedom and whatever else. The real headline, and by the way, it's because Al Jazeera continues to highlight their lies, whatever other interests you think they may have. It says the real headline out of Israel today is that Hamas attacked the main humanitarian crossing. Just lie and lie and lie. Or that Israel took out a Hamas command and control post in an UNRWA facility. No, it didn't. Take your pick. No, they're just bombing everyone alive in the area by going, then they go, that was Hamas there, and Shifa was a command center, and here's a calendar. That's what they keep doing. Take your pick. But the idea that they hit the aid crossing is so that when they say they killed 3 soldiers, if you actually understand that makes it a legal target because they're military, they want you to think it was aid because that hides the reality. Even if you want to ignore, which I don't know why you would, the legal reality of the Fourth Geneva Convention and what occupied territories have the right to arm resistance, aren't you bombing their people right now? Aren't you? And let's just pretend it's only Hamas, even though it's shockingly false. Doesn't that them give the right to bomb you back militarily? Of course not. That's terrorism. How dare you fight back? My point is they're soldiers and you're bombing their soldiers. So wouldn't that just be, that would be war, but not when it works on their side. Oh, you got a boob. Oh, you can't allow that. But he says IDF soldiers killed at military base who were preparing for genocide on Rafah, which again, Knox Boleo, which we showed this yesterday, goes through all this is where the other person I got it, I think, showing you their military bulldozers, the multiple tanks, the multiple personnel. That is what they bombed because they were getting ready to do what they're doing today. Why wouldn't they bomb that? And they lied about it because they think they were just embarrassed. And here's another one. This is a liberal Zionist vowing to do better for women, he says. And here's what he says. 3 IDF soldiers were killed, 3 seriously wounded, and 9 injured moderately to lightly when at least 1 Hamas mortar out of 10 shot hit a staging area outside Gaza where the troops were preparing for the Rafah operation. It's just so embarrassing how easy it is to prove they're lying. So we have a journalist, we have Israelis on the ground saying the incident occurred near Kareem Shalom, to the south of Rafah in Israel. Oops. And here's Ynet News. IDF rocket names of 3 soldiers killed. It says the soldiers were stationed on the border near Kareem Shalom crossing to guard equipment of battalions preparing to enter Hamas's last stronghold. The point is they're just so desperately in hopes that you don't see this, America, that you don't see this in the UK, that people that only look at these are people in Israel who hope that that's what they're doing. The one they're aiming at anyway, because not everyone thinks that. That's the point. Think about being in this position where everybody can see it if they just barely care to look. That's got to be pretty uncomfortable. Now, Suppressed News, which we highlighted yesterday, did the same thing, a good debunking of this and broke down, kind of compiled the rest of the information. And the point is that it's easy to prove that they're lying, just like we just showed you, and that their own media is reporting. It's not the crossing. It's a staging area for a military invasion. But here's what Israel said, because lie. That's what happens. At least 7 injured, some seriously, in Hamas rocket barrage fired from Rafah area. Again, I don't know that's where it came from. I guarantee that if it didn't, that'd be the best thing they could do because they want to go, Rafah, I told you, Hamas. Even though we've already proven in Israeli media and actually people inside the intelligence, they've already said that there are Hamas presence everywhere, even in the areas they claim they've taken, which makes sense to me because I haven't seen a single example of people that they've taken or killed. But he said, what Israel says, Hamas fired a barrage of rockets. Now, this is from the 5th. Remember, it happened again today. To stop the transfer of aid. The official Israeli account, knowing that's not true because they know they're committing war crimes, they know that they're a terrible war crime committing entity, has to lie about it. Just like what they have the bills passed to make sure that you are not allowed to talk about all the dark history of Zionism because it hurts their national security. Sort of like the U.S. government hiding the murdering of journalists, but Julian Assange exposed by Reuters, journalists killed. I think it was Afghanistan, right? And collateral murder because it's bad for their national security. No, those are criminals hiding their crimes, guys. That's what's happening. The rockets were fired near the Emiraty Hospital in Rafah. Again, see, human shield. They're using the hospital. They're in Rafah. None of this seems to be true. Hamas shoots rockets from civilian centers. That's all they're trying to do. That tells you everything you need to know. Oh, is it? The civilian casualties and your manipulations and how many times you've lied and the fact that you use human shield. No, that's not relevant. Just focus on our narrative and close your eyes. Now, let's get into what's happening in Rafah. Robert wrote an excellent article today that I want to highlight some of the important parts. He says, exactly like I read it as well. This was exactly what I saw after just looking at the information yesterday. Hamas agrees to ceasefire. Israel attacks Rafah in response. Now, as I understand this, it's very simple to see. And all of the evidence backs this up. Even the corporate media reports of this from the actual people involved, from Egypt and Qatar and the UN and even the United States. As we'll even, I'll just show you right now how hilariously stupid this is. This is from April 29th. This is the same deal we're talking about. Blinken hopes Hamas takes Israel's extraordinarily generous truce offer. That's what they said. Times of Israel reported it. Then, and I think this, you could frame it as Hamas calling their bluff, knowing that they didn't want them to take it, took it. And Israel goes, you're lying. Just very clumsily backs away, bombs Rafah, and goes, you're the one not doing it. The same way they've been doing the whole time. The only difference now is that they've set this up to make it look like Hamas was going to turn it down, and they didn't. So you can't just change the narrative because it's already been written. You've already made the case. And even the U.S. government is pretending like Hamas didn't take the deal now because they all look stupid. But the worst part of it is we shouldn't be laughing because they're murdering children right now to get this to be ignored. And by the way, still trying to push some other back and forth to make it look like eventually Hamas did say no, like they've done every single time. So here's what Robert wrote. Hamas officials confirmed that they had accepted a ceasefire proposal on Monday, sharing a copy of the Qatari-Egyptian mediated proposal to Al Jazeera Arabic. Again, the proposal, which wouldn't have been presented if this was not discussed by the partners on their side, the U.S. and Israel, because it was, and you can prove it. The ceasefire, which the U.S. government reportedly had a hand in. It says the week prior to Hamas having studied and accepted the ceasefire proposal, it was promoted by none other than Secretary State Anthony Blinken, who called it an extraordinarily generous proposal and ensuring that it was a strong agreement when meeting with family members of Israel prisoners held in Gaza. That basically saying that this is going to happen unless Hamas says no, right? Isn't that what they've done the entire time? Or where was that? Shoot. Pretty sure I had that right there. That's weird. Guess not. Why would it not be right here? I guess I'm going to stumble over it again like I always do, right? Somewhere where I set it up for myself. The point was I was going to show you a tweet where it's basically saying, the only thing standing in the way is Hamas. The only thing stopping the ceasefire is Hamas. The lie they keep pushing, except it's obviously not true now, and you can prove that, even though we've been proving that from the first week. But he says, however, when news broke that Hamas had agreed to uphold the ceasefire agreement in full, the Israeli government quickly moved to kill all hope of it moving forward. Because the reality we need to understand is they've never wanted this. Like you guys, if you guys have been watching the show, you already know this because we have been making this case from the very first week. They don't want it. In fact, I argue they don't even want their hostages back, which is kind of hard to see at this point. Hannibal directive or elsewise, I'm not sure. You guys can make your own decisions on why. I think it's clear that they have had endless opportunities. And even in the first week when it wasn't as all-encompassing as it was now. Because remember, even in between this, they took that middle pause that they then now said, no, we're not going to do that anymore because you're using that to continue your genocide. But in the beginning, they did have offers for everybody and they lied about it. Remember, the narrative was that wasn't even happening. First, actually, they came out and said, the hostages are secondary. That's their words. We're going to have to defeat Hamas first. Then they realized how everybody got mad about that. So they just washed it away and pretended like, it's like I keep saying, they just, oh, well, reset then, reset. Here's the narrative. Forget that. We never said that. How silly that is. But the point is, from the very first week, it's been a full exchange for hostages because that's arguably what they've tried to accomplish. Remember the videos we showed you of them surrounded by Palestinians? And sure, you could argue those Palestinians wanted to hurt the hostage, where they were saying, stop, this person's under protection. It's against our religion. You're not allowed to hurt this person. Now, you can argue that everything else was different, but you just can't keep ignoring the evidence in interest of what they tell you you're supposed to believe with nothing to back it up. That's not everything, but most cases are like that in this conversation. Now, it says the Israeli war cabinet announced that it could not accept the ceasefire, while U.S. officials refrained from commenting and claimed they were still studying it. How would that possibly make sense if it was already put to them to accept? They're just such meek, small, petty people. It says the response of both the U.S. and Israeli governments tell separate stories about the nature of the ceasefire agreement. While the U.S. claims it has to study it more, the Israelis are speaking as if they have full knowledge of the agreement already, because they do. That's clear. This either demonstrates that Israel refuses to even go through the documents, or that it knows what the agreement is already and had no intention of ever accepting it. Now, yes, you can argue that they maybe just never even looked at it, knowing they were never going to accept it. But nonetheless, the point is they had ample opportunity to know and just were banking on the idea that Hamas wouldn't accept it because they thought they packed it full of things they would never accept. Just like with the Oslo Accords and every other time they pretended they want a two-state solution, that's what they do. So good on them for making a strategic move, calling their bluff. It worked. Now it says, given that the U.S. is involved and updated on all developments, maintaining close ties with both Qatar and Egypt, it is unlikely that Washington has not had time to assess the agreement that, by the way, they already offered. Like, that's such a stupid thing for them to say. And that they helped draft, by the way. So there's no way they don't know what's in it. Also supporting the assumption that all parties had full knowledge of the ceasefire proposal are the above-mentioned statements from Secretary of State Blinken. Clearly, they knew because they said they better accept it. It's perfect. Combined with repeated comments from Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu over the past days that he doesn't intend to agree to any ceasefire. That's the thing, is the contradictions, as I've always shown you, going back as far as I've ever covered Israel. They'll tell you in front of Congress that we're fighting for the two-state solution and the evil Palestinians won't let it. But then he goes right back to Israeli media and screams about how he'll never let that happen. And they'll go, yay! How is it that the media can't do it? They just ignore it. Just like we're seeing a lot of them do still to this day. Netanyahu has been clear that it's not going to happen. And that's what he's sort of going back to when it comes to the certain circles. It's just never, it's not, no matter what. Well, then why are we pretending there's agreements going on? Why are we pretending there's negotiations if your point is it's never, no matter what, we have to finish this? It's just, this is the point. Anybody with logic and even the smallest shred of integrity can very clearly see that logical inconsistency. But it says Israel has said, that it will send a delegation to Cairo in Egypt in order to, quote, exhaust all possibilities of reaching an agreement, but also pledges to go ahead with an invasion of Rafah that Tel Aviv has already approved. Right. Because the reality is 99% of people involved in this are trying to get this to happen to stop Rafah. So for them saying we're going to do that no matter what, it belies the point. What we're talking about, though, is the exhausting of all possibilities. Guys, this is a desperate move. If I were on the side of Hamas at this point, which I'm not, if I were and I was negotiating on their behalf, I would be removing myself from this. We took it, we accepted it, let them drown in their lies right now. Because if you engage right now, they're going to pretend, like they keep doing, that the all possibilities was their last retort, and then they returned it down. It's just this childish back and forth. That's what they're trying to do right now. There's no exhausting all possibilities. What's the possibility if your narrative is no matter what, we're going to keep going, which is what they're saying. And it says, according to UNICEF, an invasion of the southernmost Gazan city of Rafah will put 600,000 children at the risk of a catastrophe, most of which, I think the whole point was, out of all 600,000, every single one of them are sick, are hurt, are injured. That was the UNICEF claim. It says before allowing any time for the, excuse me, before allowing any time for there to be consideration of implementing a ceasefire, Israel began launching indiscriminate, which is clearly what they were. I'm going to show you some pretty hard pictures in a minute, bombing attacks in Rafah, as well as against northern Gaza's Jabalia refugee camp. Again, I mean, how many times they've had to suffer there where they bombed? That was the place they claimed they were going after one person and killed 400, which, as I understand it, didn't even turn out to be there. And yet they just keep bombing a refugee camp. Why is that not shocking? Because Hamas is present. Well, okay, you mean that you didn't bomb them out the first 3 times you murdered all those innocent people? Okay, same point from before. We're supposed to take it on credit that you somehow got the Hamas members, and all we can see is dead civilians. Where are the Hamas members? Where are the rules-based international order? Why can't they piece this Gordian? I mean, think about how clear it is that they're being deceived. They can't piece this together. They can't recognize the obvious thing that they don't want to. And these are supposed to be the people that are leading the world into some new future. My God. As well, by the way, as Bet Hanun, another location they've been bombing, Israeli tanks were also mobilized to invade the Palestinian side of one of the Egyptian border crossings into Gaza, attempting to seize the site and bombarding civilian homes in the area as they pushed forward. These scenes of horror were broadcast live on Egyptian television, showing explosions and sounds of gunfire. The point is, guys, they are literally creating, and before they were already boxed in. They were already in a position where they had nowhere to go. Even Al-Mawasi is already being bombed. That's the point. The reality, though, is that they've now created a situation where even if Egypt wanted to, they won't be able to do this. How does that look like trying to let them get out of the way when you've literally boxed them in? That's what every reporting is now saying. Now, I'm talking like now in the button that with the campaign ongoing, they have surrounded them and acting like they're trying to let them leave. In every other circumstance, we've proven the same, where they say, go to this location. And then we've proven that they would shoot them while they left. They would shoot them on the way. They would shoot them when they got there. Every single time we've proven that. It says Israeli tanks. It says these scenes of horror. Oh, we read that too. Later, it says the Israeli military published an official video showing their tanks occupying the Rafah crossing. Sorry, I'm trying to clear my throat and it's driving me crazy. Excuse me. Okay. Where were we? Did I go down too far? How did I do that just now? Where were we? Later, Israeli military published an official video. That's the one right there. Later, the Israeli military published an official video showing their tanks occupying the Rafah crossing. And why is that not a big deal? Right? I mean, is this the argument, the idea that this is, I mean, the Egyptian involvement? I mean, there's so many different dynamics that makes that a problem. But like always, they're allowed to do what they want when they scream that we're attacked and self-defense. Laws go out the window, of course, but Iran can sneeze too hard when they're even in the right, and it's terrorism. It says, meanwhile, Israeli soldiers published videos to their social media accounts that featured them shooting up and destroying the area from within their tanks. We're talking about civilians, guys. They also pulled down Palestinian flags, replaced them with Israeli ones, which shows you the intent. It's always been there. These forces also reportedly murdered 20 Palestinian workers who were stationed at the crossing, labeling them as terrorists. I'll show you a clip in a minute. By occupying this crossing, they effectively blocked all people from traveling in or out of the Gaza Strip. How do you explain that unless they're trying to take these people out? In addition to blocking all aid from the 2 key crossings, which, by the way, again, has been backed up by everybody other than Israeli liars. That's very clearly what we're seeing. The Karim Abu Salim and Rafah crossing aid points. Israeli forces have also launched a campaign of airstrikes against more than 100 different locations around Rafah. clearly as some kind of like stomping your feet, childish action to get, you just got caught lying. We all see you. We all can see that you're holding up the deal. Even your own people are screaming for you to accept Hamas's deal, which I'll show you again. And what do? Just freak out and bomb a bunch of civilians. Almost like you're punishing us for seeing how dishonest you are. That's what's happening. Perhaps the worst part, it says, of the seizure of the Rafah crossing is that the same people posting videos of themselves on social media laying waste to a civilian crossing for laughs are now the people controlling whether any aid will enter the territory at all. Pretty disgusting. Now it says, why are the Israelis invading Rafah? Now it says, if you were wondering what tangible benefit to Israel's war goals a Rafah invasion could serve, the short answer is nothing. Which, by the way, has been publicly admitted by former leaders of the IDF. We just recently talked about this, and I think it was an op-ed entirely written about this. There is no discernible benefit to this. It's not the only place Hamas is. We've already proven that, and they've admitted that. It's not going to have some strategic benefit for them. It's only because of the narrative, guys. Now, it says, since February, Benjamin Netanyahu has been repeating the argument that Israel will lose the war if it doesn't invade Rafah. His religious fundamentalist coalition partners, like Ben Gvir and Smotrich, have been sworn. They've openly said this. I think there was even something written in Israeli media about this. They've sworn to collapse his government if he doesn't invade Rafah. That's what's driving this. Belligerence, hatred, extremism. Now, the Israeli media, political and military spokespersons promised their own people that the invasion of Gaza City, if you remember, specifically Al-Shifa Hospital, would bring the collapse of Hamas. Remember? There's their command center. When they, of course, failed to find any Hamas headquarters, they then told their people that the real Hamas headquarters was Khan Yunis, which also turned out to be a lie. Now, it's Rafah they're claiming will be the alleged collapse of Hamas. These are the kind of things we're pointing out. You know that the average corporate media can see that. They just don't talk about it. Why do you think that is? Now, it says the reality is this. The Israeli political intelligence and military establishments have no idea what they're doing. There is no difference in their approach to Rafah than there has been in any other area of Gaza. They bomb and shoot anything that moves, including their own people, by the way. Their forces take drugs and go on their mobile phones and film themselves committing war crimes. They kidnap, torture, sexually abuse those in their custody. They burn down homes and blow up random buildings for a laugh. Then they move on to the next area in their heavily armored vehicles. Instead of behaving like disciplined armed forces belonging to a real country, they instead resemble a cowardly and better equipped ISIS-style militia force. Now, by the way, aside from the comparisons, every single thing he proved there you can see on video. Yet you'll get people screaming that you're racist for even pointing it out. Now, he says, although the Israelis have had more than 4 months to prepare a ground operation of Rafah, the U.S. Biden administration has stated that it opposes the action. Why? Because they don't have a clear evacuation plan for civilians. Now, how do you possibly explain that? 4 months of them claiming they're working towards a plan. 4 months of the U.S. going, you can't without a plan. And now it starts. And they're going, well, we don't agree because they don't have a plan. How do you not see that as a willful action? Because their game is to kill the civilians, guys. Washington acknowledges that the flow of aid would be impacted, of course, and that the civilian death toll would be high, which is why they have cautioned against the move, which you know they don't mean, because they've also said, Matt Miller in particular, that he will support the offensive currently envisioned by Israel. He will not, that's what the quote says there, will not support the offensive currently envisioned. However, goes on to talk in many different circumstances about limited strikes and how that's okay. So, speaking out of both sides of your mouth, pretending like you caution against the thing that they're doing, but then supporting what they're doing. Sort of like saying, we believe in a ceasefire and civilians, and then vetoing the ceasefire and civilian. It's just disgusting. These people are disgusting. Much of the current Israeli establishment understands that when the war ends, so too do their careers, possibly their lives outside of prison. This is especially the case for Israeli Premier Netanyahu. And that's even in regard to his own people and his own government, by the way. So they were never looking to free their prisoners held by Hamas as a priority. And they see no way to dismantle Hamas militarily. They have not even succeeded at destroying any of the smaller Palestinian armed movements in around 7 months of all-out war. So when Netanyahu pledges that he will only accept the dismantlement of Hamas, it means that there will never be a ceasefire deal he's willing to agree to, and that he only seeks to drag the war as far as possible. Now, realize he's already said this publicly, that there's nothing that will stop their war. So it's clear that that has come to pass. It's exactly what we're talking about. Now, there's a point we're going to get to in a minute where, just like I predicted, I think it's Ryan Grimm calling it out, that they're now shifting to away from Hamas and just saying that we can't allow Gaza to be a threat. Just like I promised you. Now, whether they start to point at Palestinian Islamic Jihad or whatever else, it was never about Hamas alone. Because first of all, they're funding Hamas, guys. I argue to this very day. The leadership. The point is that obviously it was about maintaining the agenda. And the moment that they act like this is over or that it's not going to be accomplished, it's about generally speaking. And now this is where you come to the point where it's all Palestinians, which is what they've been saying the entire time. As always, excellent work by Robert. Now here, embarrassingly, is what Matt Miller had to say. Something Orwell shared. Dear State Department, she writes, it was widely publicized and verbalized by Hamas that they did accept the plan. Here he is telling you that they did not accept the ceasefire or the plan. I simply said the U.S. government, guys, and I think we all know this somewhere inside, is overrun and bursting at the seams with absolute cowards, pushovers, and villains, the bulk of whom embody all three.
Approach to go into Rafah right after Hamas accepted a ceasefire there, and at a time when many Palestinians were on the streets celebrating the possibility of a ceasefire.
So let me just make one thing clear, which is Hamas did not accept the ceasefire proposal.
Think about how shocking that is. Like, again, they lie as a matter of policy. But to know that we know that, right? To know that even in the corporate media, not that we should trust them, but are openly saying it because it's the truth. Egypt and Qatar, and the guys, they handed them a document to Al Jazeera that they gave to them that they then said yes. Right, so explain this. Well, actually, let me finish what he says here in the next part.
Hamas responded, and in their response, made several suggestions. It's not the same as accepting. The statement that was issued yesterday that was widely reported, and I'll blame the reporting, because it's what the statement said, is not an accurate reflection of what happened. They responded as people do in a negotiation process, but it was not an acceptance.
My God, what a meek response. Okay, so the point is, yeah, they did. They stated it. People reported it. I mean, you could argue that something else happened, but how do you explain? So you hand them a deal, right? They didn't respond and say, change this and that. They responded and said, yes, we'll take it. Exactly like that. And so we're to believe that then that was supposed to go back to Israel for them to change it again? Why? How does that even make sense? That's not a negotiation. That's you changing it after they've accepted what you gave them. I mean, you realize how childish this is. Everybody everywhere knows he's lying, and they just don't care. And realize, again, this is how stupid this is. This is Blinken talking about that deal that they put on the table for Hamas to accept, and they even went as far as to say, I hope Hamas takes, not offers notes to, takes Israel's extraordinarily generous truce offer. They did. Israel then freaks out and says, no, you're a terrorist and racist, and who are you even talking to? Who knows what they're trying to say at this point? They denied that it ever happened. Are we not looking at the same article that Blinken personally is quoted in saying? I mean, it's just absolutely shockingly stupid, insulting to your intelligence. And here's the Times of Israel reporting on May 6th, yesterday, the U.S. will not support Rafah's offensive currently envisioned by Israel, just in addition to the things we were reporting in Robert's article, but yet supporting the continuation of the bombing. So we know they're lying about this, and now they're just shifting into sort of halfway accepting the response to the acceptance, which is the bombing of Rafah, which was designed to sort of the actions of the ceasefire agreement to stop this. Now here is Mirav from 972 magazine on the 6th, simply highlighting the bottom line remains Israel's portrayal of Rafah invasion. Oh, these are all like backing up the points from Robert, as necessary for a win for Israel's security does not have legs. Any offensive in Rafah, in addition to further killing and destruction in Gaza, will hurt chances to return hostages. We know that. The hostages know that. Their families know that. Anybody with a brain anywhere else in the world can see that. But we still get the lies. Now here is in regard to the back and forth of the ceasefire. Here's what Reuters first reported. Rafah Live. Hamas accepted a ceasefire proposal, but Israel said it was unacceptable. Then, of course, after further due diligence, guess what they change it to? Which is usually the opposite. Hamas accepted its Gaza ceasefire proposal. Israel will continue its operation. You know why they did that? Because that's ridiculously untrue. Because once you do the smallest due diligence, you recognize Israel was involved, whether it's them pretending they're outside the operation or not, but they were sent the information. The U.S. was involved from their side. They offered a deal. Hamas took it. You don't get to swing back around and go, never mind, unacceptable, because we don't want you to take the deal. That's children, that have the power to murder other children with lots of bombs. Here's what Elon Levy said. And this is on the 6th. It looks like Hamas didn't agree to the ceasefire. It agreed to a ceasefire, right? That's not how negotiations work. That's media manipulation. This is what his job is, to come out, play the absolute bumbling fool. He is one anyway, to just lie in hopes that you water down the obvious truth. What do you mean A versus the? The point is it was offered to them and they said yes. But this is the best they can do. Actually, the way to frame it is Elon Levy is the best they can do. Doesn't that speak for itself? But here's the point about the people in Israel, as they want you to think that we're racist for not recognizing what's going on. Their families, which plenty will highlight is not the majority. I've never thought it was, but a huge, huge portion of their families are screaming about the fact that they want them to take the deal. Now, it's very clear to me that the vast majority of the families very clearly want this to stop. Now, I've said every time, that does not mean the same thing as wanting to stop killing Gaza or Palestinians. In fact, I think it's the opposite in most cases. But nonetheless, they've interestingly converged. Now, it says gathering outside the occupation forces headquarters, families of Israel captive are chanting, deal now. And that's in regard to this deal because they're the ones going, they should take it. And they do, and they turn it down. They're furious. Again, this is on the 6th where they're saying, Hamas, they better take the deal, otherwise the country will burn. You can listen to it yourself. She's speaking in Hebrew, but that is what she's saying. And then guess what? On the 6th later, when they found out they didn't, these are the families of the hostages setting fire to the road in Tel Aviv, demanding he accept the deal. Now, it's kind of a symbolic fire burning down. The point is, whether they mean politically or otherwise, the point is these people are livid. And they are pushing back for them to take the deal. Kind of different than what we're told in the corporate media. Here, Khaleesi reports of an Israeli woman who was imprisoned for refusing to serve in the IDF. She said, I serve in an army. If I serve in an army, I don't serve the people around me. I serve in a cycle of violence, or in the army, excuse me. So it's an Israeli Jew speaking about how she's being forced into the military that she doesn't want to be a part of, and they arrest her for it.
And they feel that being a soldier is an honor, that they are protecting their country, that they are doing something that is just. And I mean, the Israeli society doesn't accept the decision that I make and doesn't support it. And I've gotten harsh threats or comments, I've gotten into fights about this kind of decision. So very much not a popular stance to take in Israel. Not before and especially not now.
What do you think it is about your journey to this position that why you have ended up at this conclusion, which is at odds with so many of your own generation? What is it about your experiences?
I think a lot of it comes to the education and the way you were brought up. I think that is true for anyone. And in any kind of family that they grow up in. I grew up in a non-Zionist family. But also it very much...
Very important point. Doesn't that just... again, I could certainly be wrong. It's always possible. But doesn't that kind of make an important point right there? And how many times have we seen that same overlap? The people that recognize the difference seem to have a different opinion. Doesn't that seem to explain it all? It doesn't. There's plenty more dynamics involved and nuances. But I do think it's an obvious overlap that the people that are leaning into Zionism, interestingly, tend to be the maniacal, sociopathic ones.
Depends on the mere action of asking questions. Of when I get to the age where I, like everyone else, every young person in Israel starts to think about their military service, that they have no choice to do, that is mandatory.
Now, by the way, at least I understand it. There's ways to work around that. Maybe I'm wrong. This was from a long time ago that I looked into, but the point being that there were like academic outlets you could take that would then give you like a pass. But nonetheless, you have to engage with that. Like, so that's an interesting thing to think about. You know, it's not just a draft. It's like you're forced into the military for very obvious reasons. And I think the vast majority have to. That's pretty crazy.
And that when I got to the kind of age that I started to think about it, I also started to ask myself questions. If I go and serve in the army, what does my time mean? What does that service mean? Who does it help? What kind of cause am I actually serving if I go and invest that time?
Americans should be listening to this as well, guys. The same thing for joining the U.S. military and recognizing what their true objectives are right now. That doesn't mean that the intentions of many of them are bad. Most of them think they're fighting for freedom, so we should actually praise that. But realizing that the ultimate end game is not, and recognizing that joining that is only going to end up compromising your integrity, your morals. I think this is important.
And when I started asking those questions, I also got answers. And I realized that if I go and serve in the army, I don't serve the people around me. I serve a cycle of violence. And I legitimize and normalize this cycle of violence.
Right.
And it became clear to me that I have to not just not enlist, but I have to take action against it.
That's some courage right there. That, you know, it's respect. That is the kind of person that I want to surround myself with. Somebody who, whether I agree with their politics or not, that they have the right kind of mindset to recognize. I mean, think about the courage it takes to do that, especially where she is. Now, here's another example. Again, this is why I tend to think it's more than we realize. General Strike, Terrence Daniels points out things you won't see on the corporate media. A huge crowd of Israelis blocking Tel Aviv highway, demanding Netanyahu accept the deal. You know, the deal that he offered and they accepted, that he then pretends he's not. Like, that's how, it's not even accepting. It's just letting them accept it, really, is what's happening right now. But here they are, not just a small group. There's a lot more than you realize of people that are, at the very least, fighting for them to take the deal to stop this for their families, but at the very least are not on the side of this currently the way it's going. Now, I showed you this yesterday. I mean, this is even from Haaretz from yesterday. With Hamas talks on the verge of collapse, Netanyahu puts up a rejectionist front, saying that Netanyahu is considered to be the main obstacle to this. I know, shocking. It's always been there. You find a lot of this reporting from Israel that shows you the thing that we're being lied to about in America. It's constant. Now, Alon Mizrahi points out something interesting. Now, this is about the bigger picture as well. He says, and again, he's an Israeli Jew in Israel saying, I don't know what kind of picture you're getting from international media sources, but what's happening in Israel is profusely clear. Kind of the thing that we're talking about, right? The idea that it's, if you just pull yourself out of the propaganda machine, you can actually see very clearly what Netanyahu is saying to his own people. It says multiple members of this government, excuse me, including Netanyahu and Minister of Defense Gallant, announced many times in the past that the operation in Rafah is happening no matter what. Despite the fact that Blinken and the rest of them use that. That's what I was kind of saying before about the game they were playing. They were always planning to do this, but they were using it as a leverage tool. It says Israel will not agree to stop the war under any condition. This is also the opinion of the majority of Israelis, he says. The ones demonstrating are a relative minority, and even they will not disobey in order to join the reserve units and go into Rafah. He says also, for any means and purposes, all means and purposes, the operation already started, much as I've been saying. They've been bombing Rafah for a month, if not longer. And it says Israel has taken control of the Rafah crossing and is bombing Rafah extensively. This is today he posted this. The White House and the Egyptians are helping Israel by putting this operation under a cloud of fake doubt. There is no doubt it is happening. The Americans will blame Hamas for the failure of the negotiations soon, is my best guess. I agree with that. It's not already happened. That's going to be like Blinken or somebody else coming out and saying it was Hamas's fault, even though we all see the truth. It says, so don't let this coordinated PSYOP campaign derail your revolutionary enthusiasm. If I can call it that, he says, prepare to march and demonstrate like you never have. Israel is going into Rafah. The U.S. and the West are helping Israel, and only a huge international protest movement can save the remaining children of Gaza. Now, you can disagree with that, but I think I love his sentiment. I think we need to start thinking like that. Now, Khaleesi points out, first of all, Israel says from the Prime Minister's office, the War Cabinet unanimously decided this evening Israel will continue its operation in Rafah in order to apply military pressure on Hamas so as to advance the release of our hostages, which they're completely counterintuitive, and achieve the other objectives of the war, pretending like the hostages are their primary objective. They've stated that's not the case more than once in the first couple of weeks. The point is that, as their own families are saying, the operation is what's putting them in danger. Why? Because they've killed them many times. I think by design, but either way, that's what's happening. As Khaleesi points out, if Israel had agreed to the ceasefire today, they would have freed the hostages. There you go. Instead, Netanyahu chose to bomb Rafah, where they are likely being held. Israel does not want a ceasefire. Israel does not want the free hostages to free them. Israel wants to murder every last Palestinian so it can occupy the land. I think that's very obvious right now. And Asal Rod points out, why would anybody be surprised that Israel rejected a ceasefire deal that would release all hostages when the U.S. already vetoed UN ceasefire resolutions more than once that would have done the same thing months ago? It was never about hostages, guys. And again, the framework agreement aims at the release of all Israeli captives in the Gaza Strip, is their claim. But it's provably not the case. Ilan Levy, in response to Antonio Guterres, saying, I am disturbed and distressed by the renewed military activity in Rafah by the Israeli Defense Forces. I urge the government of Israel to stop any escalation and engage constructively in ongoing diplomatic talks. As always, they just can't, Ilan Levy in particular, it doesn't matter if it's a logical statement or not, you can't let them make you look like the evil villain that you are. So he goes, I'm disturbed, it's his usual shtick, and distressed by the fact Hamas is still holding 132 hostages, whom it's starving, torturing, raping, and executing. But that's just me. So just lie, 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 and 132 you know isn't true because they've already proven to you that you have killed most of them. But they want that number to be stuck because they want it to eventually look, if they have to, like they're not returning the ones they should or that they killed them all. That's the game that's already being played. Now, I'm not going to dismiss the possibility that they have killed some of them or that some of them died in other processes, but the bottom line is we can prove more than anything else that IDF bombings have killed them. Their own people have come home and they still tell you that. So the idea that you just you ignore the fact that everybody wants you to stop this, that what you're doing is illegal, that the deal that you put forward, you're now denying, but all you can do is kind of just turn it back on them and say, well, I'm distressed about the thing. What does it have to do at this point? In fact, what it does is show that you don't care about them because that's where you're going to. You're bombing where they're held. But the point is, again, that this guy's either not smart enough to realize the contradiction or is so desperate that he just push in something that muddies the waters. Eva Columbus. This is my point. Israel initially negotiated for 40 living hostages, then 33 living hostages. Now, the best offer from the terrorists is 33, not all of whom are alive. Okay, well, at the end of the day, the bottom line is we can prove that you have killed them with your bombings. So the way that she keeps playing this is, that means they've killed them all, which, first of all, you can't prove. Neither can I. But we know for a matter of fact that you killed some of them. So at least I can prove that that's not accurate. But they don't care about accuracy. As I said, you know why they're dead. You're just too much of a coward to admit it. And here's a great breakdown, 3 minutes long, from Dan Cohen about the Hannibal Directive and the provable evidence that they have lied about most of what's happening. And here are some of the hostages who have come back from Gaza saying Israeli military shot at the tractor taking the hostages to Gaza, killing her mother, injuring her and her daughter and her brother. We're supposed to ignore that? That's one of many who have continued to say that. And this is about October 7th. But after that, we've got the evidence of them bombing them in Gaza or shooting them when they come out, saying, please save me. Pop, pop, they're dead. The other guy runs away, comes out 20 minutes later, please don't shoot me, kills him. 2 people shoot him. All on the record. Or the other hostages that they've gassed to death with their supposedly not deadly gas. And the mother called that out because the report proved it, even though they lied about it. Hamas did it. Doesn't matter. Now, interestingly enough, this came out today. Hamas claims another person was killed with the current Rafah bombings, making our point. Now, you could argue they're taking advantage, which I don't know why they wouldn't. Not supporting what they're doing. What I'm saying is from a logical, strategic perspective, you can argue, of course they could take it. They would say, yeah, you killed more. They could be lying about it. But at this point, it's already been clear that they've said that, and every time they have, it's later been backed up by other hostages. So, as they're bombing Rafah, the point makes itself. They could be, at the very least, killing the very people they claim their objective is to save. Clearly, that's not true. And Assad Rawl points out as well, Israel's, this was the one I was looking for earlier. Blinken says, the only thing standing between the people of Gaza and a ceasefire is Hamas. Clearly not true. And Israel strikes Rafah targets hours after Hamas agrees to the ceasefire. That's the truth. Now, in interest of time, actually, because I've already gone over this for the most part, I was going to include this Al Jazeera article, again, why they don't want them to be there, highlighting the breakdown of the deal and that, yes, it was obvious what happened, that, yes, they offered it, yes, Hamas accepted, yes, Israel scrambled away acting like nothing happened. But you can break down the three-phase breakdown we read yesterday, in fact, if you want to check that out. It's very clear. It essentially is a staged delivery of an exchange that ultimately leads to a ceasefire that's hopefully lasting and the removal of their people, of Israel people on the ground. Again, my point has always been, you know as well as I that there's no reason that could happen. And literally 24 hours later, they could just go right back to doing what they're doing. They could argue they shot a rocket or whatever, or just not even care. Why wouldn't they do that? They're the ones claiming they're a big threat. And in the meantime, they get all their people back. They can't piece that puzzle together. Clearly, they don't want them back. There's 1,000 things that makes that clear, guys. Now, Israeli negotiators, as we pointed out earlier, scramble after Hamas accepts the ceasefire proposal. Great article by The Cradle, but just want to highlight a team of mid-ranking Israeli officials will travel to Cairo in the coming hours to see if Hamas will agree to changes. Which is so stupid because they offered it, they accepted it, now they're offering changes, and they're not even sending their main people. As Reuters reported, it says while confirming that Israel would not accept the current proposal. But it's not all of Israel to accept it. They did, and they sent it, they accepted it. It's on them to acknowledge the agreement they've already made. But it says this delegation is made up of mid-level envoys. Were there a credible deal in the offering, the principals would be heading to the delegation, says an Israeli official. So they can't even, it's like they can't help but be so ignorantly smug. Why would you say that right now? Because you want to act like nothing they're doing matters. We're more important. The point is, you just admitted that this isn't even important to you. Well, if it even was important, we would send the real people, but we're sending some low-level people because it's not even a real offer. How else do you take that? But this is a game. That the offer, which could end the killing and bring your own people home, is just kind of a small deal. We don't even care. Yep, exactly. Netanyahu has formally announced the rejection of the hostage deal, even though, again, it wasn't on them to reject since they were the ones that offered it and they accepted, while claiming negotiations will persist. Again, I promise you, even if Hamas doesn't even come back to the table, they're going to act like they put it forward and Hamas doesn't even care. That's what you will hear, I promise you. They've lied about it 15 times already, and I've proven it to you at least half of those. Now, I'm going to skip this as well. Actually, I'll play a part of this. This is the one from Mehdi Hassan with, what's his name, Jonathan Conricus, the general, I think, spokesperson for the IDF, the very least, says, no surprises here. Mehdi Hassan and I discussed the situation in Rafah and Hamas's latest lies regarding our hostages. I represent Israel. Guess who he represents? Like, they just can't help themselves. He's not saying he supports Hamas. He's just arguing that you're lying about the other side. But to you, if you're not blindly Zionist supporting, then you're a terrorist, pro-rape, pro-mob, anti-Semitic maniac. Just dumb, all the way to the bottom. Broad stroking, no evidence, claiming what you are is the only thing that makes me, it's dehumanization, which I am no fan of Mehdi Hassan. But it's pretty stupid to just argue he's representing Hamas, like he's there as their representative. That is the kind of leadership you get from Israel. Why wouldn't you just come out and be like, here's why he's wrong. Let me prove to you that. That would be what a respectable person would do. But when you know that you're lost, when you know that you're caught, what else can you do? I want to play just the beginning of this.
Fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies and the former IDF spokesperson, retired Lieutenant Colonel Jonathan Conricus, also with us, the editor-in-chief and CEO of Zateo, Mehdi Hassan. Mehdi, I know you have an exclusive report about a letter that Republican senators sent to the International Criminal Court. We will get to that in just a few minutes, but I want to ask you about this reporting about Hamas saying publicly they've agreed to a ceasefire deal, but it's really kind of a counterproposal that they have.
Setting the lie. Is that what an interviewer is supposed to do? Let me set the narrative for the challenge. Like, so if the idea was to have them discuss it, why are you setting the narrative? Here's the lie, go. That's not what happened. I'm sure that's what she stupidly thinks happened because she was given some sheet that says that, not what they actually think. It's not what happened. Even if you have Blinken saying they better accept this because it's a whole big deal, it's obvious that this was not what happened. Now, Israel's also trying to now lay it on the U.S., acting like they did something wrong, showing you that nothing is sacred to them. They will attack their own allies the moment it suits their interest, just like the U.S.
That includes elements they know Israel never agreed to. So
yeah, they did. Yes, they did. Like this, they're trying to pretend like they put things in it they knew Israel wouldn't agree to because you're already setting the argument that it was Hamas that didn't want this. They didn't add anything, guys. That's the most obvious part of this. Let's just say you want to argue that Israel didn't know about it, which is kind of what they're trying to pretend. You can easily prove that Hamas didn't add anything. They just said, yes, we agree to what you put in front of us. And yet here's a CNN anchor saying they knew they added things that they wouldn't accept. Why? Because that's what Israel does every time. Who do you think gave them that narrative?
Was this some kind of propaganda effort by Hamas to say, we're at the table, we're agreeing to something?
Which, by the way, is what they've done every single time in reverse.
Well, look, the reporting we have says that, yes, it was an Egyptian Qatari proposal that the Americans were involved in too. The CIA director Bill Burns has been involved in this. The Israelis apparently were on board until, of course, Hamas agreed. And then the Israelis' bluff was called. And now they're saying, well, we don't agree to this proposal because we want to free the hostages, even though the proposal would help free the hostages.
Isn't it shocking how easy to see that is? That's the truth. And the logic of how, yes, that would have freed the hostages, but their argument is we need to go into Rafah to free the hostages, and if we take the deal, we can't free the hostages. I mean, it's like the stupidest circular logic I've ever heard in my life. The very statements contradict themselves.
Can I just pause you there for a second? Because I think I just want to add one bit of information.
Of course, because as the interviewer, you have to make sure you nail down, like, you're not even letting him talk. You're debating him at this point. It just shows you how clear these people are and narrative managers. Just cuts them off right in the middle of a sentence.
This proposal because we want to free the hostages, even though the proposal would help free the hostages.
Can I just pause you there for a second? Because I think I just want to add
one
bit of information I think is critical here. The part that Israel didn't agree to is the part that calls for a permanent end to the war, and
which it didn't really do. We read the two yesterday. I mean, ultimately, it ends with a ceasefire and an agreement that you're ceasing hostilities, but that does not, I mean, let's say the day after that, Palestinian Islamic Jihad did something. Well, they would attack them, and you know that. So the point is that this is not the end to anything. They could make 1,000 reasons to do it. This is just an illusion to make it seem like they shut it down. They're the ones that put it forward.
And I think this is really what is at issue here, that Israel has never agreed to that, and that maybe this is a counterproposal, but that means essentially that everybody has to get back to the table and agree to what is on the table now.
Oh, okay. What was on the table now? They're so bad at their jobs. She was going to say what Israel put forward. So the whole point is the only way this ends is if you agree to what Israel wants. Don't you understand, you racists? I mean, that's what she's shooting. But either way, that's what is on the table. Well, okay, so all you're saying is the same thing. Not until they come back and accept what we put forward. So let's just say Hamas comes back and the pretend back and forth and says, okay, but then we add this. Okay, well, then you could say it ends when Israel accepts it. Isn't that the same point? Well, no, it only works one way. You're a racist.
Yeah, but let me just say, in what world is Hamas going to say, we're going to release all the hostages and you carry on killing us? Obviously, outside world, America, Western countries has been wanting a ceasefire for a while. We were told Hamas was the obstacle, and now they're calling Israel's bluff. The reality is, Abby, that the obstacle to a hostage deal has always been Benjamin Netanyahu, and those are not my words. Those are the words of Chaim Rubenstein, the former spokesperson for the hostages' family, who told the Israeli press last week that Netanyahu's been the obstacle. He says that they found out there was a deal on the table back on October 9th, 10th, to get hostages released, but
shocking! Breaking news! What Ryan's been telling you for 7 months. Well, welcome to the independent media if you're new to the show.
Who hid it from them. Those are the words of the spokesperson for the Israeli families of the hostages. And
by the way, that's not what I'm telling. That was a provable fact in the first week, directly from people involved. I was proving it to you this entire time, just in case you're new. Right? This is not hard to see. And I wasn't the only one. There's plenty of other independent media. Just recognizing this Mehdi Hassan breaking moment on CNN that they even disregard is not new information. And if anybody anywhere in this conversation was honest, that would have been the talking point from the very beginning. But they're not.
Hid it from them because he knows that if he agrees to a hostage deal, his fascist colleagues in his coalition government will collapse his government. This is Israeli domestic politics.
Which we just talked about, by the way. That's true. They're threatening to collapse the government if they don't. So he's just a puppet at this point for his own extreme parts of his government.
Colonel, what about that? I mean, if the hostages are all released, shouldn't Israel seriously consider ending hostilities in Gaza and allowing for a political settlement that leads to the future?
Now, think about the question. As always, what do you think is going to happen? Is he going to honestly engage with the dynamic and say, well, yes, I mean, that makes sense. It's logical. We do want our hostages back, but let me explain why that doesn't meet our need. Nope.
Yeah, I'm listening to the second edition of Mehdi Hassan's monologue that I saw earlier.
So first, an attack on him personally. Okay.
And it's not surprising that you're parroting Hamas talking points.
Okay, you call him Hamas. Classic. Wait for it's racist probably coming soon.
Let's put things here in perspective. We have a terrorist organization that abducted civilians and soldiers.
Oh, back to October 7th. Got it. See how that works? You could have guessed exactly what would happen because that's all they have. Now, you look, even Mehdi Hassan's like, oh, come on. Like, they're just recycling the same talking points like Ryan Mast, like all the rest of the blind following paid off members of Congress that are fighting for a foreign country at the expense of Americans. It's crazy. And even if you agree with everything they think about that, we're still talking about 7 months later and an ongoing genocide and the interest to stopping that. To just pull it back to what happened 7 months ago. It's perverse at this point.
They're the ones for the last 4 months have been refusing any deal that Israel, the U.S.
Lie. I mean, I'll just leave it there. I wanted to play a little bit more, but just for time. I mean, but these are lies, guys. Lies. Provable lies. Ryan Grimm, this is the point I was making earlier. It's just alarming. Now, this is a diplomatic Christian affairs correspondent for Times of Israel. Now, there's a whole thread, but the point is, he says, Israel will achieve its war objectives. A senior Israeli official tells me, quote, we will destroy Hamas's military and governing capabilities, free the hostages, even though those are contradictory at this point, and ensure that Gaza does not pose a threat to Israel and the civilized world in the future. Now, you could argue they mean the same, but I agree with Ryan. I think it says Israel shifting from saying their objective is to make sure Hamas is not a threat to saying that they want to ensure that Gaza does not pose a threat. I mean, you obviously see how that can shift. It's mission creep. It's what they do every single time. I knew it was coming. We're going to see that. I promise you. Even if they actually destroy Hamas, which is probably not likely or possible, they will shift to one of the other groups. Now, the last point is just to show you what has happened since. This is what we've seen. Now, there's going to be some graphic stuff here. First of all, Dan Cohen highlights, and this is going from today forward, moments before invading, Zionist soldiers blast a ram's horn and chant, let us destroy Rafah. That's what's happening. On video, on the record. Many of them posted on their own social media. They're all yay, destroy it all. And yet they pretend, if you listen to the corporate media, Blinken and Biden, that they're pinpoint targeting Hamas and they're getting all the people out of the way. And it's that easy to prove. I don't think I had that in there. Yeah, it's just them. You can just listen to it. It's in Hebrew, and they're just singing and chanting. Now, this is an interesting clip in regard to the beginning of the cutting off of the crossing. This was earlier today. It says the Rafah crossing is closed, cutting off the lifeline for 1.5 million people. The same group that has been screaming that they're the only one allowing aid through has now just officially cut down the crossing in general for the beginning of a military operation. And here's what the report says on the ground. Al Jazeera, of course, because this is why they're so desperate to hide what they're reporting.
Israeli military is still operating inside Rafah crossings, and we did look at videos and footage emerging from the area through official Telegram accounts belonging to the Israeli military, associated with the Israeli military, but it's showing a great deal of damage caused by tanks and armored vehicles, causing a great deal of vandalism inside the crossing property.
And what he's talking about, by the way, are the soldiers. Just like everywhere else they go, showing you that they have no control over their crazy IDF. Like, I mean, how many examples? Like, don't you think that they're either completely okay and even supporting the actions they're taking, the stealing of lingerie and jewelry and the destroying of their homes and the assassinations, or they're just so completely out of control that they're not a real professional military, as he pushes every time, that they just don't have control. They don't have integrity. They don't have any kind of discipline. Because right now, you saw them take this crossing, and as Robert covered, and you can see in video, they're just driving their tanks around, laughing and blowing things up. These are children.
Itself, the Israeli military started at early hours of this morning under heavy cover of intense bombing by artillery, shelling by attack jets, by the quadcopters in the area at the vicinity of the crossing, as well as the attack drones at the eastern part of Rafah city. What's going on right now did not stop at just the text message or the phone calls that sent to people. People right now are forced to evacuate under heavy, intense bombing campaign at the.
I don't miss that, right? They love to drop some leaflets that, by the way, in very aggressive nature, say "Get out or we're going to murder you," which is basically what it's translating to. They're bombing them out of the way. Does that sound like what you do for people that you're trying to save? Obviously not. Or bombing where they end up going, or shooting them on the way, which has happened every time.
Eastern part of Rafah city, and the fact that the Israeli military right now is operating inside the crossing itself, cutting off the only lifeline right now to the people in Gaza, particularly for the 1.5 million displaced Palestinians here in Rafah city. At this point, this landed crossing has been vital within the past months, allowing the humanitarian aid to go through it, even though it was at a very low level, at a very low capacity, but it provided a lifeline for people crammed in this small part of the Gaza Strip. Now we're seeing
another point that I want to point out right there for why if I would ask why they might allow any in, right, is that if you don't allow any aid through, by this point, it would have been scenes like you would have never imagined. People literally like skin and bones, dying, collapsing in front of cameras everywhere. I mean, I can't believe they're able to pretend this isn't happening. But that would have been something nobody could have disregarded. So that's one of the arguing reasons. Now they can make it a slow, dripping process that they can just casually blame on Hamas. That's, pretty disgusting, but that's what's happening.
With the Israeli military presence here, all landed crossings are closed right now by Israeli military. This is
all closed. That's the truth. Just they keep lying about it.
It's sort of sealing off the Gaza Strip and cutting it off from the remaining parts of the surrounding regions.
So here's what happened after that. Well, first of all, this was from the 6th, yesterday. These are images and satellite images that were they were showing you that they were reinforcing their military around the borders. Satellite imagery obtained by Al Jazeera revealed that positioning of nearly 300 military vehicles on the outskirts of Rafah, a city now housing over 1 million displaced people. They were boxing them in. Today, it's even more clear. Megatron reports that the IDF is now in control of the entire Philadelphia axis along the Egyptian border in Gaza. Now, there's multiple aspects of crimes, in my opinion, in regard to both the Egyptian side and what's happening to Gaza. This is a breach of the Egyptian-Israeli peace deal of 1979, also known as the Camp David Accords. According to the agreement, Israel is not allowed to station any military units in Zone D, which consists of a narrow strip of land along the entire Egyptian border. But they don't care. Why? Because they don't. They never care. There's nothing sacred at all. And these people argue, the Zionist government, that if they need to, it's okay because it's what we need to do. Self-defense. You're racist. It's the same as everything else we've talked about. As they've said many times, we can legislate anywhere in the world. International law doesn't apply to us. If you don't believe that, it's easy to look up. They've said it more than once publicly in the Knesset. Same point applies here because they want it to. So they have now completely blocked them in and are currently bombing them. You explain how that makes sense of saving the people they claim they're trying to save. IDF Hamas terror targets. IDF strikes Hamas terror targets in East Rafah. Terror targets. Also peppered with a lot of civilians, if no terrorists at all. But who cares? Terror targets in East Rafah? Isn't that the place that you've been telling us until 30 seconds ago is the safe zone that you've been keeping safe? And if not, why'd you let Hamas in there? If you told them to go there because that's the safe zone, doesn't that imply that you let it become the not safe zone? It's just, it's everybody else's fault. Again, like you're in kindergarten, right? You can't take responsibility for your, everything they say continues to be pushed off to somebody else. At the end of the day, it's obvious that they did nothing, that they've just been torturing these people, displacing them, bombing them on the way, laughing about it, murdering them on the side, starving them along the way, bombing every location, and then posting about it on TikTok. This is one of the journalists on the ground highlighting that they have killed 20, executed, he writes, 20 Palestinian employees at the Rafah crossing. I don't know why we would even dispute this is possible. It's been seemingly the only consistent thing of the whole process. And remember, they just killed workers in Lebanon, civilians. Now, Sir Chili Bean highlights that the bombing it has been ongoing for a month. 1.7 million people, half of them children. Now they're carpet bombing the area, as this was even being reported by Al Jazeera. Look at this, guys. That's not some small bombing. That's not some one tent attack. That is a massive bombing that I can guarantee you killed a lot of civilians. Sarah Abdallah writes the same. Israel is still intensely bombing Rafah right now. This is today, targeting residential homes and killing civilians. Bodies of children are being found under the rubble. Now, I recommend, if you've got children, that some of these next things are going to be hard to see. But and by the way, the reason I used it for the picture today, I believe it's important that we truly see what this is. And I know most of you know that. But this is something that we really need to understand. This is what they're doing. If this is a random soccer player, football player, and wherever you are in the world, been killed by an Israeli airstrike on his family home in Rafah. Here are the children that you can see. Now, I recommend, again, this is rough to see, guys. These are dead children that have been collapsed in the building that they're desperately trying to dig out. And it's Max Blumenthal saying, here's what Israel did in Rafah. This is what its road to total victory looks like. God. Here. This is one of the hardest things I've seen. I don't know why this hit me so hard. I mean, it's obvious why, but of all the things we've seen, a father tries to comfort his son while he is receiving medical treatment as he was severely burned and injured in an Israeli airstrike on Rafah. I think it's really just the fact that he's trying to hug his son and he can't even do that. I just don't know how anybody can pretend this is not exactly what it looks like. There's the picture we used today. As Sarah Wilkinson writes, well done, world. The Israelis take Rafah, close the border, no medicine, no aid, no intervention. The international community has excelled itself this time. Right? So you go in there, aren't you trying to save all these people? Why didn't you bring any help for them? This is what they're doing. And guys, these are not some hype. These images themselves have been reported and have been seen by people on the ground, doctors, journalists, watched this happen. This has got to be one of the worst things I've ever had to cover in my life. This is the worst thing I've ever had to cover in my life. And it's not just the worst because it's so shockingly bad. It's the worst because people that are pretending to be good are the ones telling you this is okay. This is not wrong. It's actually the right thing, that we're defending ourselves, that these people are bad. It's going to sit with me for the rest of my life that we didn't do more to stop it. Here's a Saul Rod. Today I saw a Palestinian man pick up the pieces of flesh to put in a body bag, a child's lifeless body pulled from the rubble. and a little girl being carried out with a blood-soaked face. Then I saw American students get arrested by riot police with batons for protesting the horror. We just showed you this yesterday. BM reports the fact that they're sitting around the table before this just happened. And here's what the Israelis are saying in their news discussion. I think we should have gone into Rafah yesterday already. There are no uninvolved civilians there. You have to go in and kill and kill and kill. We have to kill them before they kill us. This is what they're teaching people. Not everybody believes it. Not every Jew, not every Palestinian, Israeli. Clearly a lot of them. Majority, it seems. But not everyone. This is what they're teaching people. This is why they grow up to think this. This is Shimon Boker, vice chairman of the World Likud, the international arm of Netanyahu's own party. We need to go in there and kill and kill and kill. That's what they're promoting. That's what our media can't recognize. That's what Biden can't acknowledge, or Trump, or RFK Jr. Here's Assad Raul also pointing out the UN has publicly made it clear operations in Rafah will be a tragedy beyond words. The WHO incursion in Rafah will plunge crisis in Gaza to unprecedented levels. Doctors Without Borders, nowhere in Gaza is safe. Human Rights Watch, forcing displaced Palestinians out of Rafah is catastrophic. Everybody else you could imagine, this has to stop. Wall Street Journal, why Israel must take Rafah. It's the last sanctuary for Hamas's military battalions. That's not true. Even their own people say that's not true. This was written yesterday. Great job, journalism. Assad Raw also points out in the New York Times. This is how they wrote this article. 24 bodies brought to Rafah Hospital, doctors say. What a great reporting. What happened to them? Why are they? It's just so many. As she makes the clear point. Here's how it should read: Israel kills over 24 overwhelming Rafah Hospital. That's what happened. They know that. Not even Israel's denying that. What a weird way to say Israel's already killed 12 Palestinians in Rafah, and hospitals have no capacity because Israel attacked them. Because that's the truth. Here's a video that, by the way, and he makes a great point about this, as much as it's a TikTok weird video that I hate. He makes a great point. We've shown you this video. But his point that I like is that he said, look, I showed you this back in February. Nobody wanted to listen. Now we're watching it happen in Rafah.
Past 215 days of this genocide. Watch.
And if you don't remember, the video is showing you the different segmented areas and how they said, move, you got to move because this is not the safe area. Go there. And then they bombed them all there. And then they move them over there. And by the way, every time bombing back where they were as well and where they're going. That's been proven. But shifting them along, bombing them the whole way along. That's the truth.
Remember when they told everyone to move down south? It's going to be safe down south. Watch. The crazy part is, I showed you guys this 135 days into this genocide. We are 80 more days into this genocide, and we are literally witnessing the same thing. Close to 40,000 innocent people have been murdered. Tens of thousands are still under the rubble. And now everyone's here, down in the south, in Rafah, and they're bombing Rafah. There are over 1.5 million innocent Palestinians that have been displaced in the south of Gaza, in Rafah, right here. Over 600,000 of them are children. The aid, the food, the waters, all in that area. And now Israel's indiscriminately bombing this area. Now, mind you, all of these people are living under tents. They're indiscriminately bombing this area, dropping leaflets from the sky telling them it is no longer safe to be there. They have to leave. Where are they supposed to go? Literally, where are they supposed to go? There is nowhere else for them to go. How can you look at this visual demonstration and not call this a genocide, not call this an ethnic cleansing, not call for a ceasefire? So we need you now more than ever to keep posting, keep sharing, and do not stop talking about Palestine.
Exactly. Now, remember that clip's been from a while ago, and then we played that as well. It's a great graphic. It's important because it's hard to deny. But the argument being made by some of these, pro-genocide Zionists, if you will, are saying, well, there's plenty of places they can go, which I'll show you right here. But the reality is, Al-Mawasi, for example, as I keep saying, has been, we discussed this months ago, They've been bombing there. So this is a game that the media willfully ignores how that's happening. Here's what Elon Levy says. Well, first, I always do that. Jeremy Corbyn says, the assault on Rafah is another utterly despicable war crime. As bombs rain down on a trapped and terrified population, we implore our government to find an ounce of humanity and end its complicity in this senseless massacre. Wake up. This is not a war. It's a genocide. And don't forget, this is the guy that they, was caught up in being called an anti-Semite for the same dumb reason other people have in the past. Not to say that there aren't those existing, the racist doesn't exist. That's a stupid thing as well. But he was never doing that. It was because he was pointing out uncomfortable truths for the empire, and they used that against him. The point, though, is Elon says, you can't say they're trapped and condemn Israel for trying to move them. Just these lazy, clumsy arguments. How in the world can you not? Just because they're moving them into a dangerous place does not mean they're helping them. You're just, again, this person is so bad at this. And yet he's the best they got, it seems. Asaf MD says they are trapped, surrounded on all sides by the IDF, which we just proved to you. You're a liar, Elon. You're a liar and a disgusting war criminal, 100%. Lastly, here's what Caitlin Johnstone wrote. And I think this is important. I don't oppose the butchery in Gaza because I love Hamas or hate Jews or love Islam or hate America, which is basically the things that the two-party illusion jams things into. She says, I don't oppose the butchery in Gaza because I'm a lefty or a commie or an anarchist or an anti-imperialist. I oppose the butchery in Gaza because I'm not an effing psychopath. Opposing Israel's butchery in Gaza is so obvious. So common sense, such a bare minimum fundamental level, being human 101 position that if it isn't immediately self-evident to you after learning the basic facts, your problem is much, much deeper than whatever ideology or bias or prejudice you might happen to have. There's something wrong with you as a person. If you support Israel's butchery in Gaza, you've got much bigger problems than merely not having the correct ist or ism belief system. You're just all effed up inside. Your conditioning has made you into such a generally shitty human being. You have deep and immensely consequential flaws in your character. And you won't mature as a person until you heal and transcend them. Opposing Israel's atrocities in Gaza doesn't make you a good person. It just makes you a normal person. And supporting Israel's atrocities in Gaza makes you a bad person. Nobody gets any points for opposing an active genocide. That's just the basic bare minimum requirement for a normal human being with a functioning empathy center in their brain. If you can't meet that basic bare minimum standard, you deserve to be viewed with suspicion and disdain. And anyone in your personal life who cares about truth, morality, and humanity should seriously reassess their relationship with you. And this isn't about political differences, guys. I'm not even getting into the political. This is about the murder of innocent people on any side. The idea that anybody should support what happened on October 7th or support, and I'm not talking about the active resistance. I'm talking about the crimes that were committed, whether by IDF or Hamas, or the ongoing 7 months of genocide since, or any number of other examples around the world. It's just about basic human decency and the crimes that we can see and how they pit us against ourselves using the screamers and the two-party illusion who don't care about the things that they pretend to care about. It's a trap, and we've been lost in it far too long. I'm just hoping some of this stuff can just shake the hell out of what needs to be shaken so we can see it, so we can stop it. Thank you for tuning in today. I know this stuff is hard. I know some of this can be really emotional, but I know you see it. I know you feel it. And it's just time to do something about it. This cannot continue. We can't fall back into these traps and cycles and wait for this to start up again. And as somebody pointed out in the chat, by the way, which we've already highlighted, what's going on in Congo should be highlighted. What's going on in Myanmar? What's going on in many locations that the U.S. government and Israel, we can prove are involved in. That's not just because I'm trying to overlap these things. It's because it's the truth. And you could see it. The diamond industry, the whole overlap of what Israel controls there and maintains what we're dealing with. And there's a huge part of why that is allowing what's going on in the Congo. And it's overwhelming. The central line you can see, and it's not just one government, one religion, or one ethnicity. It's clearly people who don't care about humanity at the expense, or for their interest at the expense of everything. I know we see it. Help us stop it. Thank you for tuning in. I love you all. As always, question everything. Come to your own conclusions. Stay vigilant.